If I can ask members of council to please come into the council chambers. Okay. Members of council, if you can please take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. Members, if I can ask you to please rise for a moment of silence. And during this time, please remember Holden Nalia. Thank you. Members, we have two presentations this morning. The first is to recognize Diane Young, Chief Executive Officer of Exhibition Place, on her retirement from the City of Toronto. I would like to call upon Mark Grimes to come forward for the presentation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good morning. We started the meeting off yesterday with a kind of a sad note, and we're starting the second day of sad. We're losing another great one this morning. We said goodbye to Chris Berlinger yesterday. But today I'd like to recognize Diane Young as she's retiring after a remarkable 31 years. So 31 years career at the City of Toronto, including 22 years as the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of Exhibition Place. I had a chance to talk to Alan Tonks a couple weeks ago at Diane's retirement party, and he asked her to come down in 1997 on a temporary assignment to Exhibition Place, where she went on to stay for 22 years, and what a great 22 years it's been, Diane. Diane has accomplished a career at Exhibition Place. As the CEO, she played a pivotal role in the development and transformation of the site into a vibrant meeting and entertainment destination. And just a great example of some of the things that have happened here recently with the Collision 3-year deal she signed with Collision to come to Toronto. It's putting us on the world stage was amazing, but there's been so many to mention. Diane led the way for Exhibition Place to become a world leader in environmental stewardship, creating a legacy of sustainability for years to come for those and citizens of Toronto. Under her strategic leadership, Exhibition Place is now home to BMO Field, the Raptor Practice Facility, Coca Coliseum, to name a few, and has hosted major sporting events for this city. Won a couple years ago the Pan Am Games, which is absolutely fantastic, putting us on the world stage, the FIFA Under-20 Men's World Cup, Women's World Cup, Winter Classic, many Grey Cups. We've already had a couple Grey Cups there. Diane has formed long-term partnerships with private sector enterprises who contribute substantial capital investment into our city infrastructure, making Exhibition Place the largest largest entertainment and convention site in Toronto. The 192-acre site attracts over 5.5 million visitors to Toronto and is an integral part of Toronto and Ontario's economy. And it is Exhibition Place. Former Chair and Deputy Mayor Joe Pantalone taught me very soon into my term on the board, it's Exhibition Place, not the CNE grounds, it's Exhibition Place. So we had a going away party for Diane. It was absolutely remarkable, the amount of tenants that came up and wanted to speak. We had Ward Earl, our singing solicitor, who I don't know if he's here this morning, but he brought his guitar and sang Don't Go Diane. You'll probably get a copy of that on sale. Nick Eves from MLSC, one of our big tenants there, came and spoke. Former MLC employee Bob Hunter was also there. The Di Donato, Nick and Pat were there to talk about Diane's legacy. Former Chair Joe Pantalone, he was there. And Alan Tonks was there, who put Diane back there in 1997. But last but not least, Henry Callan, Hotel X, he spoke, and I know this was Diane's baby. I did reviews with Diane over the last couple of years, and she really made it clear that she wanted to see this thing open and hang around to make sure that got open. And Diane, it is open. And if you haven't been down to Hotel X, go down. That is what Henry Callan says is Diane's legacy, is that hotel. There's an option to build another one. So Diane, so we're going to invite you to the opening now when it does come. But on behalf of the City of Toronto, I would like to thank you for your excellent service and dedication as a valued leader here at Exhibition Place. We wish you all the best in your retirement. I'm going to ask the Mayor to please come forward with a scroll for you.
Diane, this is not to take away from your honor here today at all, but thank goodness we don't have a singing chair of Exhibition Place Board. But having said all that, I want to just thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for that incredible record of service that Councillor Grimes just made reference to. You know, I think I'm old enough, not as old as Councillor Grimes, but I'm old enough to remember, you know, that Exhibition Place, while it always had the CNE there, was a place where, aside from that and the Royal Winter Fair, you were never sure on a continuous basis what was going on there. There was the old CNE Stadium as well, but now it is a place where, as Councillor Grimes said, there's year-round activity of all kinds there. It was a source of great pride to us that we could have something like Collision, very much a 21st century event that did put us on the map, at a very excellent facility that was itself of a global quality. And there are many other events I could talk about. And I myself, maybe some members of council have not yet been to the hotel, but I happened to go there, hadn't been until a couple of months ago when I was early to go to a recognition event in memory of the people that died in a plane crash not too long ago, and went into the hotel. And it's just dumbfounding how incredible that hotel is. And that, again, is a tribute both to the developer, but also to you and to your work in shepherding that through. And it took time. It's like good food. It takes time. But it's a truly spectacular hotel, and I think it's going to be a huge addition. I also look at it from the standpoint of the future, which is that I very much hope, and it's not probably a unanimously shared view inside here, but I hope that we can find a way, and Councillor Cressy is working on this, where we can get a good revitalization of Ontario Place with our complete input, as should be the case, because it's in our city. But at the same time, I'd like to see us find a way to do something with Exhibition Place that continues this work at the same time, and do the two in cooperation. We'll see if that proves to be possible or not. And I think what you've done is you've put us in a much stronger position to be a part of that going forward, thanks to the evolution of Exhibition Place that has happened on your watch. And so I will just add to Councillor Grimes the congratulations of not just the City Council, but the people of the City of Toronto for all of your efforts over all these many years. And as I said yesterday to Chris Brillinger when he was retiring, unfortunately, as you well know, there's not much we can do by way of giving you some sort of greater token, but I think this carries with it, I hope, a very special sentiment from us as to our gratitude and our recognition of your excellent contribution to the city in many different respects, but particularly Exhibition Place over the years, and that you'll receive it in that respect.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. It's a real pleasure.
We're going to take a picture over here.
Just a few words, because I know last council meeting, summer's coming, here we go. It's been an absolute honor for me to be part of the public service of the City of Toronto and Metro. I started my first job at Metro Toronto and then moved on to the Amalgamated City, and I cannot tell you how great it is to be a public service here. And the best career anyone could have is 22 years at Exhibition Place. Absolute dream job, nothing that I would have ever imagined as I graduated from law school. So it was really wonderful. Many thanks to the Board of Governors and to the City Council, because we have brought numerous requests here for loans and building projects, etc., and they've always received the support of the City Council, and also a shout out to Exhibition Place, because the staff at Exhibition Place have made it happen and have go in every day to try to deliver great services to our clients. And just to note, I kind of hung on till July 31st, because yesterday at Council, there was a small report about heritage amendment, easement amendment, and it's all about the bridge that will connect that 400-room wonderful hotel to 210,000 square feet of conference and gala space. And then there's another connection from the Beanfield Center to our 800,000 square feet of exhibition space. And with that, we can market ourselves as a self-contained, connected conference convention facility, and that is key in our industry. And I know as I am leaving, our sales team and our entire staff are so dedicated to making that sales pitch for Toronto and bringing more collisions to Toronto in this great convention facility, which is the largest in Canada, 6th largest in North America, and they are determined to increase that surplus to the city over the $5 million and increase that economic impact over the $4.25 million, because that is what this business can do for Toronto, and it is an exciting business, and we know it can happen. So thank you again for this recognition. Thank you for all of the support you've given me and Exhibition Place and the Board of Governors over this 22 years. Thank you.
Our second presentation is to recognize the Toronto winners at the China Innovation and Entrepreneurship International Competition. I would like to call upon Deputy Mayor Min Wong to come forward for the presentation.
Yes, good morning. This morning we are here to recognize the Toronto Award winners from the 2019 Shenzhen International Innovation Competition. But first, I'd like to acknowledge our guests this morning from the Consul General of the People's Republic of China, Mr. Zhuang Yaodong, Acting Consul General, and Mr. Shen Jianlai, Counsel for Science and Technology. Shenzhen, China is known as the Silicon Valley of Asia, a dynamic high-tech city of 18 million people. Its expat community established a relationship with the City of Toronto in 2015 through a Memorandum of Understanding. Since then, the progress our two cities have made is nothing short of remarkable. Not only have there been several exchanges between the two countries, but the Shenzhen community moved quickly for what they refer to as Shenzhen speed, to establish an innovation center to promote and expand the commercialization of discoveries in Toronto and the GTA. The office is right here in Toronto. The city of Shenzhen has also established a global innovation competition to promote innovation and help entrepreneurs develop their products. Please watch this video to get a feeling for the size and scope of this global competition.
Our confederation built a very good platform and bridge between Shenzhen and Toronto. We promote two cities to be friendship city. We signed MOU in 2016. So we have innovation competition, innovation festival each year. We set up innovation center in both sides. We can help more startup companies and also innovation companies to develop in China, especially find more investors, customers, and partners.
So competitions have taken place in cities such as New York, San Francisco, Israel, London, and the Canadian finals have taken place at Toronto City Hall for the past 3 years. There were 1,850 global competitors this year. Of them, 137 traveled to Shenzhen for the global finals. Today, we are happy to recognize the Toronto innovation companies who made it to the finals and won several top prizes. I would ask the representatives from each company to stand as I read out their name. Phibos won the gold medal in the Internet of Things category by designing and developing an optical measurement platform to be used in industrial sensing applications. Genesis Bioindustries won the gold medal in the New Energy and Materials Finals competition and the silver medal in the Grand Final competition. They're working on creating bacteria that turns organic waste into valuable chemicals. ARHT Media won the silver medal in the Internet of Things category for creating immersive, photorealistic, holographic experiences at a fraction of the cost of similar technologies. And finally, Nano Device Solutions came home with the bronze medal in the Advanced Manufacturing Final competition for its high quality and high resolution atomic force microscope. In addition to the outstanding platform of these companies in the 2019 competition, 2 other Toronto companies have been awarded significant prizes. Kondavi Medical Inc. won the silver in biology and life science and silver in the grand final for its NovaSight hybrid and Foresight imaging systems, which look at coronary arteries and heart structure. And Taplock won the bronze in electronic science and technology for developing the first smart fingerprint padlock. Also, I would like to recognize the Canadian Confederation of Shenzhen Association and the Psi Innovation Center. Jenny Chi is the chairperson of the Canadian Confederation of Shenzhen Associations and has been the Canadian catalyst and key architect of the Shenzhen relationship with the City of Toronto. Leo Liu is the president and CEO of the Psi Innovation Center located in the City of Toronto. Reza Maridi is the honorary chair of the Psi Experts Advisory Council, and Songnian Zhu is the chair of the Psi Experts Advisory Council. We are grateful to Psi Innovation for their work in supporting Team Toronto and Team Canada. The innovation, creativity, and persistence of these companies are what position Canada as a global leader in technology and innovation. We are proud of all of you for your accomplishments. Please join me in congratulating them for their great success. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
May I just say, Madam Speaker, that beyond what the Deputy Mayor said about this particular competition, I just wanted to pay special tribute to Reza Maridi, who's here. He served, as many members will know, as a minister in the provincial government, specifically in the area of innovation. And when you see reported this morning, not just this news, but also the news in the news this morning, that we, again in 2018, were the third biggest source of tech and innovative jobs in all of North America. It is a tribute to his hard work that he did, because I can assure you, as mayor and before, I dealt with him, and he made a big contribution as a public servant and as an elected representative during that time, and I just wanted to acknowledge that while he's here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations. Okay, members of council, we will now review and confirm the order paper. There are 122 items left on the agenda, including 53 member motions. Yesterday, council set times for a number of items. I will summarize the items and seek council's guidance on how it wishes to proceed this morning. Council previously scheduled items, i.e. 6.11 on the Cycling Network Plan update and item i.e. 6.12 on Cycling Network Plan 2019 cycling infrastructure installation to be considered together as the first items after the mayor's key matters. As the mayor's key matters were only completed before the recess last night, council has not started these items. Council has also scheduled the following items for this morning. AU 3.14 on opening doors to stable housing, an effective waiting list and reduced vacancy rates will help more people access housing. CC 9.28 on a 6020 and 6030 Bathurst Street zoning bylaw amendment application. CC 929 on 6040 Bathurst Street and 5 Fisherville Road, zoning bylaw amendment application. CC 9.16 on Murray Road regeneration and land use study, a city-initiated official plan amendment, and then as well, City Council will consider member motions at 2 p.m. Our first item after members' motion will be EX 7.10 on Toronto Hydro Corporation Annual General Meeting, 2018 Audited Financial Statement. That will be followed by item CC 9.2, the Ombudsman Toronto Inquiry Report on review of the Toronto Transit Commission's investigations of a February 18, 2018 incident involving transit fare inspectors. Members, is it the wish of council to consider the cycling items first this morning, followed by the other timed items? Because as you know, yesterday everyone moved motions to time items, and these are all the items that were timed for today. And so I would suggest, considering that we completed the mayor's key item on Vision Zero, that we continue with the two items that were scheduled, that IE 611 and IE 612 on Cycling Network Plan. Is everyone okay with that? And then we'll, okay, on favor, carried. I will now take the release of member holds. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Page 3, Executive Committee, EX 7.5, Planning Recreation Facilities for the Don Mills Community. I have two motions that I've reviewed and have the support of staff from. One is to create a development timeline. The second one is to create a community outreach strategy. I'd like to move that with the report.
Okay, this is on page 3, EX 7.5. The amendments are on the screen. Recorded vote. Oh, Councillor Thompson, did you want to hold the item down?
Is that possible? After the vote?
After the vote?
I can do it after the vote.
Okay. Okay, so on the amendment, recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please.
Councillor Crawford, please.
The amendment carries unanimously, 21 in favor.
Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you very much, Speaker. Just on a, I guess, a point of personal privilege, I'd like to just comment and congratulate the leadership of Deputy Mayor Min Wong on this particular issue. This was a very tough issue for him with respect to his community and so on. There could have been a much more difficult situation as it relates to people in conflict and some of the challenges that we're experiencing in the cities with respect to some of the commentaries and so on. And I think that the way he handled himself and handled this particular matter really should be commended by members of council, and I want to thank him for his leadership on this file. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Although I did request a timing of these items on page 10, CC 9.28 and 9.29, I'd be prepared to move the confidential attachments and the recommendations therein. Release them now.
Okay. So on page 10, CC 9.28, Councillor Pasternak is releasing the items. Yes, on 9.28 first. On favor? Carried. On CC 9.29, on favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, Speaker, on page 3, EX 7.10, releasing Toronto Hydro Corporation Annual General Meeting 2018 audited financial statements, and that is a timed item, so that would take care of that. Thank you.
It is a timed item.
Yes, so it would remove that timing.
Good job.
Oh, you're releasing it?
Yes, I'm releasing it.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, on page 3, EX 7.10, Councillor Fletcher is releasing on recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please.
The item carries unanimously, 22 in favor.
$1.5 million?
Councillor Cressy.
Thank you, Speaker. On page 10, item CC 9.26, 504 Wellington Street West, zoning bylaw amendment. The solicitor's report is now being circulated, and I can release that. It's CC 9.26, 504 Wellington Street on page 10.
Okay. Councillor Cressy is releasing CC 9.26, 504 Wellington. On favor? Carried. Thank you.
And Speaker, on page 8, item TE 7.3, 300 Bloor Street West, I held this as the local councillor. Councillor Layton was out of the room, so I'm happy to transfer it to him, and I believe Councillor Layton is ready to release it with a quick amendment.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Okay, just one sec. Okay.
The clerks have the amendment that was prepared by staff, some clarification on the direction.
Oh, they don't have it yet. Yes. Okay, so we'll hold it down until it's ready. Councillor Holliday.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Page 3, AU 3.6, Auditor General's 2019 Status Report on Outstanding Audit Recommendations for City Agencies and Corporations. I did have a technical amendment.
Does the staff have it?
I hope so. And I'll explain it to members of council. It's just changing the individual who will be reporting to the audit committee from the Auditor General to the to the CEO of Toronto Transit Commission to be consistent with the way that we're doing the other reports. Thank you.
The amendment's on the screen. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On page 5, GL 6.12, I've looked at it, I'm okay with it, I'd like to release it.
Just one moment. Which item is it again? I'm sorry. Which item?
6.1, GL 6.12.
Oh, okay. Do we have the amendment? Oh, you're just releasing it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, it's on the screen. All in favor? Carried.
On the same page, GL 6.13, final report on property sales, acquisitions, expropriations, and leases. I think there's a, I do have an amendment. Sorry, it's that we let it go through because of the sale or release taking place.
Okay, it's on, the amendment's on the screen. So do we want to continue holding it?
I'll hold it.
Okay, continue holding it.
6.25, increase in penalty amounts for stopping and parking violation. Madam Speaker, I rarely do this, however, I do want to thank you and your office for all the work that you have done and input, and we're at this place today. Certainly, this will go a long way to answer questions of people that park across the schools and on school bus zones and everything else, and I'd like to release it. Recorded vote, please.
Okay, GL 6.25. All in favor?
Recorded vote, please.
Oh, sorry, recorded vote. Recorded vote.
Councillor Layton, please.
The item carries unanimously, 22 in favor.
Councillor Perks. Oh, you have another one? Okay.
If staff have, but this is IE 6.13.
Okay, what page?
What page, Jim?
Page 6. If you don't have it ready, I can do it after lunch.
Yeah,
You got it ready? Okay.
okay,
Please
after
put it up.
lunch. Okay. Oh, is that it? It's on the screen? IE 6.13.
Madam Speaker, Metrolinx, in its usual fashion, was not cooperating with the merchants in my area. They were not communicating to my residents. We did have a meeting with staff and the City of Toronto staff. I want to thank them for going the extra mile and getting Metrolinx on the tables. And this comes out of this for us to be able to have a community liaison and be able to speak to Metrolinx and get answers that we need.
Okay. The amendment is on the screen. Okay. The amendment is on the screen. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Councillor Perks.
Good morning, Speaker. On page 3, I can release EX 7.17 capital variance report for the 4 months ended April 30th, 2019.
Okay, on page 3, EX 7.17, Councillor Perks is releasing. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to give you notice on page 9, bottom of the page, CC 9.14. I'm going to have to go on camera on this item at some point just to let you know, so we can
Okay.
schedule that.
Thank you. All those in favor of adopting the order of paper? On favor? Carried. So we'll go to IE 6.11, which is the cycling network plan. Questions? Nobody has any questions? Okay. Councillor Lane?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In the report, there was an amendment made at I'll let transportation staff get comfortable in the hot seat. So my questions are about the cycling network plan update. Of the changes made at committee, one that was added include developing, this is recommendation 17. So this involves developing a set of warrants similar to traffic calming to support the installation of bike lanes. What now goes into the thought process about the installation of bike lanes?
Through the Speaker, the overall cycling network plan is a network-based analysis on the process of determining which routes are value cycling routes in terms of looking at the destinations they serve, the resident population and employment population they serve, the cycling safety incident history of those locations, the way that those routes would cross barriers such as highways and ravines, multifaceted analysis to determine the value of that route for the network. And then at the project level, there's an assessment on the impacts and benefits to that particular route and design when it's proposed to come forward.
So before we bring forward a proposal, we do some analysis that says this is where the bike lane should be based on where people, what routes people are using currently, where we could put them onto safer streets, and where their destinations might be, as well as building out a larger network.
That's correct,
So
and the level of analysis depends on the scale of the project.
So it's not as easy as just kind of measuring the speed of traffic, the volume of traffic, and saying you're in the 20th percentile or 80th percentile, you qualify for a bike lane, let's put her on. Like, you look at what streets can accommodate bike lanes, where bikes are going, who's using those roads, and then you make a decision based on that.
We do. We look at potential demand, existing demand, and then when you're looking at a particular street, you look at speed and volume of the vehicle traffic to understand what design type is most appropriate for that location. It's a multi-stepped process.
So do you think it's necessary for us to develop a warrant process similar to traffic calming in order to justify the installation of bike lanes in these cases?
I think that the process that we undertake already includes all of those checks and balances.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong?
Yes, thank you. On the same topic, this is a question to the General Manager. We have a warrant process for stop signs and traffic calming devices like speed bumps, yes?
Through the Speaker, we do.
And that provides a framework for this council to decide whether something should be recommended and approved by this council. Is that correct?
Through the Speaker, it does.
And so, sorry, are you having a conversation?
Just to add that process is also defined through the Ontario Traffic Management Manual. Sorry, the Ontario
Okay.
Traffic Manual.
So,
So it's a consistent standard.
Yes.
That we apply locally.
So within that arrangement, from time to time, do you get motions from community council or notices of motion? I don't think you can do it. Actually, it would be through community council. They just circumvent the process and they try and. Sorry, are you distracted
Go ahead,
there?
I'm going to let you answer the question because you
I'm
know
sorry.
it better. I'm going to let Jacqueline answer the question.
No, this has to do with traffic calming.
Oh, okay. Carry on. Sorry. Finish your question.
So
sorry.
Thank you. from time to time, you get motions from community councils just to put in speed bumps and stop signs that wouldn't meet the warrant process. Is that fair to say?
We do an analysis related to the warrant process, and then sometimes,
But sometimes
based on...
it just gets,
based on
short-circuit the
situations,
process, and they don't do that.
Or the council will
do whatever they
proceed
want.
with, with a different approach.
Has that ever happened with has that ever happened with a bike lane?
Where we've proceeded with a different approach based on council feedback or community feedback?
No, has there ever been any type of bike lane put in that hasn't been recommended by your staff?
Through the Speaker, not to my knowledge, because the process of installing a bike lane also involves a detailed a submission of the bylaws required to implement that bike lane and changes to parking and traffic regulation, so it's not something that can be made through a single motion.
So, question to General Manager of Transportation. So, your staff said that there's a proper framework and we don't need any more of a framework. What's the capacity, how many cyclists need to use a road before you recommend a bike lane be put on it?
I don't, through the Speaker, we don't just make that decision based on existing volume.
Oh, I know you don't, but I'm just asking on that is there a requirement that there has to be a certain capacity on a road to warrant consideration for a bike lane?
Through the Speaker, we do not require a certain threshold of cycling volume be met in order to add a cycling facility on a roadway.
Do you think that's a good idea?
I do, because I think that typically latent demand is significant, and that's why we look at destinations, that's why we look at potential users. When you build a cycling facility, you will almost always see a huge uptick in the number of users that you wouldn't see if they did not feel comfortable in that roadway cycling previously. So I don't think existing volume is a good indicator.
So you don't think that the number of cyclists that are using the existing road is a measurement that's important in considering whether a bike lane should be put in on a road or not?
I don't think it's the most important by any means.
Do you think it should be a criteria?
Probably. It's probably good to look at where a desire line is.
Oh, so you do think that there should be, you said probably there should be a criteria for some sort of measurement of that, therefore there should be a warrant.
I said I think there should be a look at existing facilities comprehensively, and one of those things that you'd look at for existing facility comprehensively is whether it has some use, which implies that there's some desire line on that facility that's connecting one or more destinations to each other, and people have chosen to use that route. Either it's flat or they can get through it with a traffic signal or other pieces like that.
Madam Chair, through you to the General Manager of Transportation. Do you ever get any feedback once a bike lane is put in that no one's using it and they don't want those bike lanes put in and don't you think it would help if there was a measurement that would tell those communities that those roads are already used extensively by cyclists?
In my experience, through the Speaker, in my experience, there's always a group of people who get engaged in transportation projects well in advance at the design stage and the planning stage. When the project goes in, there's often another group that maybe didn't understand exactly how the interaction was going to happen that get involved after the fact. We often have comments after the fact, and that's why we are always committed to tweaking a facility to try to make them work with that community after the fact. But as we've talked about previously in the Council, the cycling network plan is just that. It's a network plan, and so the local access pieces, while critical and important to get right, are part of connecting a broader network in the city, and that's the most critical thing.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, through you, Madam Speaker. I wanted to get some clarification. In the report, it identifies the West Hill area as one of the higher used areas for bicycling in the report. So I'm trying to understand how you determine bicycling infrastructure, for example, in that area, because right now, for example, once again, bike ring posts or bike posts are just being put in on a request as basis. So how are we accelerating bicycle infrastructure in that area as the demand seems to be increasing?
Through the Speaker, yes, we are. We actually have a project proposed in the near-term plan on Ellesmere next year.
Okay, but what about like the whole area in general?
We are looking at a approach to, rather than take projects on a one street by one street basis through the design, consultation, seeking council approval process, we're looking at the way to cluster those routes. Routes like Ellesmere would connect to the existing bike lanes on Conlins, which we're proposing to upgrade in this council session today. So
Okay.
we are looking at network approaches to expansion, and I know in particular Ellesmere within that area is in the 2020 program.
Okay, and I guess the other, I'm not just interested in the bike lanes or bike routes, fully supportive of those, but trying to understand, like, bike posts, like bike rings, what are we doing to, they only seem to be going in on a request basis.
There's a mix of request basis that comes through to respond to where residents are needing to have more bike parking, and I know we've only had a couple of requests within your ward recently, and we are open to receiving more and looking at where we can put more. We've also been proactively putting in bike parking across the city, including within that area at schools in partnership with the Toronto District School Board, and so we also have a proactive program of bike parking along primarily more retail streets. So those locations where we can provide bike parking in the right-of-way is a proactive process.
Okay, and then the other question I had, one of the charts, it outlines all the environmental assessments that are taking place for bike lanes across the city. One of them is for Eglinton, Kingston Road, Morningside. Is that EA all tied into the LRT, the Kingston LRT EA? So you're waiting on the LRT to move forward before you're going to consider bike lanes on Eglinton, Kingston Road, and Morningside?
The process for Eglinton is well underway in terms of the part with Eglinton Connects and future sections in east and west of the Eglinton Connects section. The other components are currently planned as part of the LRT work, but they're depending on how transit conversations happen at the city, it may need to be programmed at a different time.
So sorry.
We would be open to programming it on a standalone basis study if that, depending on the way that those projects transpired.
Okay, and if for some bizarre reason the LRT doesn't go forward, where are the bike lanes on those three roads in the grand scheme of things?
They're within the major citywide cycling routes program, in which we would want to pursue full installation of by 2041 with a 60% installation rate by 2031. So we would still be pursuing those major routes, irrespective of the other projects that we currently think they would be tied to, if they would go ahead in those years or not.
Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask about, and I asked about it as well yesterday, was the bike share TO program, because there seems to be a disconnect between the cycling infrastructure in Eastern Scarborough and trying to get bike share TO to be more involved. I have like the University of Toronto Scarborough, Centennial, the GO train stations, property owners, they're all interested in more bicycling infrastructure and being involved in it. But when I approach bike share TO and say, what are you doing? They always point back to the city and say, well, there isn't a lot of municipal bicycle infrastructure in Eastern Scarborough. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, and I'm trying to understand how that can be addressed.
Thanks for that, and we can certainly converse further with our colleagues at the Toronto Parking Authority who run the Bike Share Toronto program. I know that they've done a feasibility study of expansion programs, and it doesn't anticipate serving Scarborough in the near term because of the nature of the way that the demand would be in that area, but I fully understand what you're saying in terms of the demand is supported by the route infrastructure as well, and so we share the routes that we are planning with the Toronto Parking Authority for bike share expansion planning, so we can have more conversations in that regard.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Councillor Bradford, you have questions?
Thanks very much. I just wanted to clarify some of the previous questions. When we're looking at expanding the cycling network, installing bike lanes, infrastructure to support active transportation, are we looking at the existing demand or what you were referring to as desire?
Through the Speaker, we look at a range of different things. We certainly, as I mentioned previously, look at use because it implies that it's probably a good route for cycling. But we look at, I think, much more critical issues related to latent demand, meaning people who might be cycling on that route if it was improved but aren't cycling now.
So that would be the potential.
Correct.
Okay, and then we're actually looking at that delta between existing demand and potential or latent demand as well when we're investigating where we should be putting bike lanes.
Yes, we look at current cycling demand based on the 2016 Transportation Tomorrow survey data, which demonstrates existing cycling trips, as well as potential demand trip generators, the way it serves transit access, connectivity, network coverage, how it crosses barriers, safety, and equity.
Okay, so that's very clear. We are looking at that. I wanted to talk a little bit about active transportation versus the idea of traffic calming. We're talking about a warrant process for stop signs. We talk about a warrant process for speed humps. Does Transportation Services look at active transportation or connectivity differently than they look at traffic calming? I recognize that bike lanes have an added benefit of traffic calming in some instances, but is there a different lens for specific traffic calming measures like speed humps or stop signs versus active transportation?
Through the speaker, yes, and while the warrant process is quite distinct to each tool that we're looking at for traffic calming or for stop signs, and it looks at a variety of localized issues related to volume and crash rates and speeds. As I mentioned previously, the cycling and active transportation is typically better served looking at a network-wide basis. So while there are local impacts as well, active transportation has a lot of different factors related to it, some of which is related to land use, some of which is related to transit access and connectivity with other modes, as well as volumes.
So do we take a network approach when we're looking at expanding or building new roads?
Through the speaker, I don't think we build a lot of new roads anymore.
Right. But if we would, if you're building a road, are you looking at connectivity with existing roads? I know we don't have a lot of greenfield in Toronto for sure, but sometimes a laneway goes in. You're looking at that connectivity.
Through the speaker, we are looking at connectivity and we're also looking at access. So if a new property is going in where you have a brand new development and you need to look at access, that's a situation where we might put in a new road to connect.
Do we have a warrant process for that?
No, new roads would go through an environmental assessment process, which looks at many of the factors at a grander scale than we've described for cycling network.
Do we have a warrant process for sidewalks when we're putting in sidewalks?
Maybe we should.
No, we don't. We have a sidewalk installation policy approved by council, which says that all major arterials and collectors would have sidewalks on both sides, and locals will have them on one.
So is it fair to say that what we're talking about here is connectivity, whether we're talking about roads, sidewalks, bike lanes, active transportation, the message here is connectivity?
Absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Councillor Wong-Tam, you have questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you, staff, for the report. I'm very curious to ask if you can unpack the equity statement for us a little bit more. I pay attention to all the equity statements within every single report, and I found that in this case you have actually put in a lot more language. Can you explain to us how putting an equity lens over the cycling network can achieve greater safety and inclusion for residents of Toronto?
Through the speaker, thank you for that question. I think it's very critical and important that we're looking at the communities that we serve when we're making any kind of investment in infrastructure. And the equity lens, as we spoke about yesterday when we honored Chris Brillinger, is an excellent piece of making sure we're doing a consistent scan related to our communities and the equity nature of investment. And we really wanted to make sure that in the cycling network plan and also in the Vision Zero plan, we brought that down to the level of infrastructure investment so we could identify where people who had the highest need could be well served. And I'll let Jacqueline talk a little bit more about the specifics.
One challenge with balancing serving existing demand is that we also need to make sure that we're serving equity-seeking groups and vulnerable residents in the city. And the way that infrastructure is designed and integrated into the community is a key way to make sure that people have opportunities and mobility. When infrastructure is not properly integrated into the community and doesn't meet the needs of those users, it has the potential to have unintended negative consequences on equity-seeking groups. What we did as part of this process is we looked at the way that the cycling network served neighborhood improvement areas and how we can better serve that, particularly in relation relation to connection to transit to have multimodal trips. And we also went out to every neighborhood planning table and sat down and talked with the communities who represent the neighborhood improvement areas at that table to talk to them about what barriers they have to cycling and active transportation generally, and what destinations are important to them.
And if we were to take that particular work and deeper analysis that you've just drawn some conclusions to and overlay that with the cycling network plan, by implementing the plan as quickly as possible, by targeting those priority designated strong neighborhoods, it actually could be an equalizer. You can bring more people into the conversation around civic inclusion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and that's the intention of where you're going with this report.
Through the Speaker, it is. And I also just want to point out that it also gives the ability for whoever, there's going to be lots of people for many years implementing this plan. We want that equity lens to be baked into all of those decisions so that they don't have to be revisited each time.
So I don't need to move any other motions. It's already in there. That was
our explicit intention.
Okay, thank you. And then with respect to accelerating the plan, we're always talking about trying to rush to the next waiting post. With respect to what can move the plan faster through implementation, construction, design, consultation, and just sort of identifying priorities, based on what you've just said about the equity lens over this report, we can address that's been taken care of. But how do we number one, deal with the other factors that don't seem to be in the report, and namely those things that I've spoken about in terms of ECS coordination with respect to moving through without bigger, broader consultation, which we know is important, but we're always going to run into this conflict. How do we make sure we get this done?
Through the Speaker, I think we've done some assessment about lessons learned about the pace of delivery and some of the coordination challenges through the first few years of the Cycling Network Plan implementation. We feel like we've applied some new strategies to better tackle the implementation pace and improve our capital coordination and delivery rate, as well as our engagement with communities. We think that the plan, in terms of what it's intending to deliver within the next 3 years, is 120 kilometers of cycling infrastructure, is quite a strong step forward. It's very specific in terms of which routes are identified, and it's on par with what other major cities in North America are delivering.
And you're fairly confident that you'll hit that mark? You will, because we've had cycling plans before. We've had all sorts of ambitious strategies and quantums that speak to large routes, hundreds of kilometers, but we haven't always hit our outcome.
It's certainly our ambition and our target to do so. We know we'll need help from the communities as we engage. We'll need help from the councillors to work through the processes, because there are sometimes difficult decisions on particular routes. And so we need to balance addressing every individual's concerns with expediency and implementing the network. But we think that together with the partnerships of the community stakeholders and councillors, that we can deliver that as staff.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to follow on the questions that Councillor Bradford just asked, because I think they were important. I hope members were listening to Councillor Bradford's questions. And I want to follow on that. Like using an EA system instead of a warrant system to build a new road, for building a new bike path, you have already committed that you do look at who's already on it to some extent, but in more of an EA process than a warrant process. Let's for a minute presuppose that we did have a warrant process. And I'll use a local road. Shepherd Avenue in my ward is in need of study before we can proceed with it. But there's no question that it connects to a lot of trails. It connects to a lot of local roads that would be used in the network plan. But I wonder if you could tell me talk to me about the dangers of deciding that on the basis of a warrant system. If there was a warrant system and I needed a certain number of bikes to be on that road to get staff to recommend that road, in your professional opinion, should I as a politician say to my residents, it's a very dangerous road, you're going to have to get your bike on it or I can't give you a lane?
I think that would be a challenging proposition through the Speaker, because some of the roads that we've introduced cycling facilities on in recent years, such as Richmond and Adelaide, had very low cycling volumes before the cycle tracks were installed, because they were inhospitable to cyclists before the lanes were changed. And so having a minimum volume of cyclists, it puts people at risk to actually ride that route to get the demand before you would install it. I don't think that would be a safe approach to take for major arterials.
Similarly, Don Mills Road runs right through my ward and carries right on down. Could it connect one day to, it could be the Relief Line North. We could have above rail, so if you're doing study there, you got to take into account future transit, et cetera, et cetera. But if I want, as part of the equation of designing the transit, as part of the equation of making it a part of the network, as is opposed, should I call my residents now and say, start cycling all the way down Don Mills Road in a rush hour because I got to meet a warrant so that the transit will include a bike lane?
That's a great example, because some of these major arterials will require major reconstruction in order to achieve a safe separated cycle track as part of that cross-section. And so that's a complete streets approach, is about rebuilding the street to serve all road users. And Eglinton Connects is a great example of that, where council had the foresight to plan for separated cycle tracks as part of that transit project. And now we're in the detailed design of it.
Right, and so that transit could start construction, and then no sane person would cycle on it for years until that transit project was done. And so if you put a warrant system in place, I could actually never meet it in a million years until that transit is done, and then it would be too late to add the cycling lane. Would that not be the outcome of a warrant system?
That would be one of our fears of a warrant system. It's a bit of a cute saying, but it's often said in our field that you wouldn't determine if a bridge was needed by counting the number of people swimming across a river, and so it's a very similar kind of scenario.
And lastly, I have one other question. I hate to keep belaboring this point, but we have a warrant system for pedestrians. Let me know if my rationale is right. For pedestrians, we can use a warrant system because they're just using human leg power, so they have to use the shortest route. So sadly, they might use an unsafe route. But a cyclist has choices. So if a route's unsafe, they probably are going to go to the other street, even though for connectivity, the unsafe street, if we put the infrastructure there, would be the one. So warrants work for pedestrians in ways that they don't for cyclists. Am I getting that right?
Through the Speaker, that's an interesting point. I would actually say that given the changes that we've made to the warrant process through the Vision Zero 2.0 plan just yesterday, we know that we actually need to take a deeper look at the way that our warrants serve pedestrians so that they serve them better. And so we need to revise what were the old school warrant systems about you need to have this number of pedestrians, that sometimes we can't rely on that because from a safety perspective and given the distance and connectivity and access for people of where they would want to make that crossing, that may be still a safe location even though it doesn't meet the old school warrant. That's why we've changed our warrants for pedestrians.
Thank you. I think I'm clear now. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Yep.
Now, just to remind members, we're doing 11 and 12 at the same time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wondered if I could just get some clarity on exactly what we're considering in this report and how the attachments relate to the recommendations. So the first attachment I wanted to ask about was attachment number 1. And do I have this right, that the recommendations in the report are suggesting that council adopt attachment 1, which is a map, as our vision as to where all of the cycling infrastructure should go over time? And you've taken some time to score these routes. Have I got that right?
Through the Speaker, the map as attachment 1 is an ultimate network concept. Not every route shown on that map is meant to be constructed. Some of the routes are parallel to each other and would need to be reviewed into which one better serves the route. So attachment 1 is the summary of the scores of all of the proposed network routes that scored in at least a minimal scale, and it wouldn't propose that this entire network be installed.
So I don't understand that, because the recommendation that was put in the report says City Council endorsed the cycling network plan as outlined in this report and mapped as the proposed cycling network and near-term cycling implementation program in attachments 1 and 4. So I guess as a member, I'm struggling with this because I'm being asked to vote and endorse this.
Through the Speaker, the next few words in that particular recommendation indicate that that would be the framework for bringing forward cycling infrastructure projects, and some of the mapping explicitly, and in the text of the report, the strategy explicitly indicates that we would bring particular routes up for consideration in parallel to choose the better route to serve the community.
Okay.
Each project would need to come forward to Council for approval. In no way does this plan, looking for Council endorsement about the strategy, give us authority to install even a single kilometer of bike lanes.
Okay, understood. Now, attachment number 4 is a little bit more complicated. It goes into the work that you're going to do over the next few years. And if I got it right, it speaks to a lot of work. Some of it's great, some of it I got some concerns with. And some of the things that are included are studies or infrastructure on places like Bloor Street, on places like Yonge Street, and many smaller projects on that map. But that's essentially what we're doing. We're telling you go forth and either do a study or build the infrastructure you've articulated in the map.
Through the Speaker, for clarification, it's to study or to assess the feasibility and do some design work and seek Council approval to build. There is no Council approval to build within this report. This report is an overall network plan, and it identifies our work plan for 19, 20, and 21, in which we would bring particular routes through the feasibility, design, consultation, and Council approval process, and it would be back on your table to consider.
But we're still endorsing you to consume resources and make effort to create these projects and to go out and consult and design and spend resources on. So Council would want to be careful with what it's directing you to go and work on, right?
Yes, and we have met with almost all councillors, 23 out of 25, plus the Mayor's office, to go through what is proposed in each ward. And so we've vetted this quite carefully, and we've clarified with councillors which projects are tied to other capital projects in the program.
Okay.
And, through the Speaker, I'm sorry, Councillor Holyday, I just wanted to say that the part of the approach that we've taken in looking at a comprehensive citywide network like we've done with Vision Zero is to give Council a data-driven and quite neutral approach to how we would propose to connect this network and build out this network for your consideration.
Okay, and the last is attachment number 2, talks about major citywide cycling routes, and we're also going to endorse this map in there. And it talks about, if I got it right, places where you're recommending that we do a study in the short term and maybe in the long term.
That's correct. So it identifies with red the study planned in the short-term 2019 to 2021 program, as well as future studies that would be required to implement then major citywide cycling routes.
Okay, back to attachment 1, it essentially, in my observation, really is an overlay of the busy streets in the city.
Just one sec, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Speaker.
If I can please have some quiet in the council chambers, please. Members of council, staff, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam.
Attachment 1 looked at...
If I can just finish the question, if it's okay. Attachment 1 overlays desire lines, essentially, and shows, based on a whole bunch of scores, the idea of where the cycling infrastructure could go because of desire and analysis. And to me, it looks awfully like a lot of the busy streets in the city. Cars are on those streets, people are on those streets, bikes are on those streets. And if you could add some comment, in the report it talks about you use the Transportation Tomorrow survey and you take a percentage of the existing car trips. And is it 66% of those with the assumption that those would become cyclists? How does that math work and how does that relate to this map?
Thank you.
Attachment 1 is the result of the scoring of our process to update the cycling network plan. So we looked at the 2016 cycling network plan proposed routes that were also in the 2001 bike plan. We looked at routes that have been defined for cycling as part of local secondary plans that have already gone through the council process. We took feedback from consultation we'd received in the first cycling network plan route. We did analysis based on the current demand, potential demand, and all of the other categories that we spoke about earlier, and then scored them on how they fared, and that is what is demonstrated on map 1. The 66% metric is to not overestimate potential demand. It's not that 66% of vehicles would switch to cycling. It's looking at the amount of trips within that are taken by transit or by vehicle currently within a 5-kilometer radius only, and it takes a 66% of the mode share in that area to understand potential demand, but we've been conservative to not overestimate that.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
I know this isn't exactly about new, but I'm very interested in the current cycle lanes and how you have your maintenance schedules. There are regular maintenance schedules and repainting, how often, the potholes that are in all of the cycle lanes. Do you do anything special from transportation, or are those simply when the roads are getting paved?
As part of the cycling network plan in 2016, we had a renew component which looked at improving the safety and quality of the existing cycling network, and that's through things like repainting lines, adding new green markings and new symbols and signage to make them consistent with today's standards. And as part of the Vision Zero plan investment from Council last year, we upgraded, or in the process of upgrading between this year and last year, 10 corridors where we had added new green markings and new pavement markings. The surface maintenance is done through the State of Good Repair program, as well as through pothole maintenance, and it's both on a proactive and responsive to complaints basis.
So the understanding would be that all of the cuts that utilities have made and they've paved over, or they've been taken out in order to do a permanent pavement, that there's no one who actually reviews the bike lanes for dangerous surfaces outside of what's going on the main road.
We do. We have a component of our Vision Zero plan, which is about enhancing the cycling network and ensuring safety. And so there are corridor-specific enhancements and checking for safety concerns. In terms of pothole review, it's not a separate cycling pothole crew, no.
So there's nobody that looks at, you would agree with me that it's one thing to go over, excuse me, Councillor. It's one thing to go over a pothole in your car or a large bump or some kind of mar in the pavement. It's quite another thing to go over that on your bicycle. Would you agree?
Through the Speaker, I would agree, and I also wanted to indicate that we have a team of maintenance patrollers throughout the city who travel the roadways and also report back on impacts to cycling facilities, so we are keeping eyes out for that. We tend to get lots of feedback, of course, from cyclists and people who are using those routes because they really are on the ground in doing that.
Do you think the standard that you've set is high enough?
Through the Speaker, I think there's always better that we can do in terms of state of good repair for cycling facilities, and so it's one of the reasons why we are paying close attention to our budgets related to critical interim repair. Pothole maintenance is critical and important, but it's a short-term fix, and doing more repair work that is getting a sort of a smoother outcome is critical for cyclists. So we're doing more of that critical interim repair.
Do you have a crew that goes out and simply smooths the current and existing bike lanes?
Through the Speaker, we do not.
You
currently.
do not.
We do not.
But you
currently.
could.
We could. We could make
have
that an
a
area of emphasis.
dedicated group that ensures safe cycling, because you would agree with me that that's a very unsafe condition.
Through the Speaker, I would expect that to be everybody's job in the division who's doing maintenance repair, but I hear what you're saying, and I think it is important that we get to that point.
I know it's everyone's job, but you would agree that it's far different in your SUV on Dundas than on the bike lane on Dundas, which is very marred, chipped up after a difficult winter. So right at the moment, there's nobody who's gone and looked at every one of our facilities and determined that certain things need to be brought up to standard for these small, I'll call them vehicles or transportation devices that are very different than a four-wheel transportation device.
I would agree that the impact is more significant, and I would agree that we don't currently have a dedicated crew to do that work.
So would you be open to looking at that?
I would.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When you install bike lanes, what sort of work do you do, or follow-up work that you do in studying the effectiveness of a bike lane on a road?
Through the Speaker, it very much depends on the nature of that street. So sometimes it's a local street and not very much impact, and so you intuitively know that it's working well. You address issues on a complaint basis. On other streets where we've done much more extensive planning and evaluation, like in the case of the Woodbine cycle tracks or Bloor Street, we do things as much as counts of both motor vehicles and cyclists beforehand on that street, and on alternate streets we look at vehicle travel time in order to inform signal timing changes. So the level of monitoring and evaluation varies based on the nature of the project.
So with regard to when you're looking at, you install a bike lane, and thank you for mentioning Woodbine because I'll refer to that. Do you look at number one, the increased car congestion? Do you look at the traffic infiltration in the local community, the environmental impacts of the idling of cars sitting around for a long time? Do you look at those impacts, and again, I'll use Woodbine as an example, on recommending any changes, number one, to the community, but changes to impact the safety concerns? Because when you look at just on a safety concern, yes, it is safer for cyclists, but do you look at the safety concerns in the local roads with the increased traffic that is driving around?
Through the speaker, yes. In the case of Woodbine, even though it was not a pilot project, we did before counts of motor vehicles on Woodbine and on some of the neighborhood streets where we knew there would be concerns of infiltration. We did after counts, we did travel time surveys of vehicles, of how long they're taking to get down the corridor. We used the details from that to inform changes to traffic signal timing. We made changes based on both observation and complaint to some safety concerns where people were having challenges backing out of their driveways, and we adjusted the sight lines for where the bike lanes and bollards and parking started adjacent to those people's driveways. So certainly, even when it's not a pilot project, on major projects like that, we take an approach where we evaluate, and we also evaluated the bike counts before and after as an example.
Okay, so with regard to, and I respect that you look at that, you do make the changes, you do look at understanding what's happening in the local community. You've done all of that. I was on Woodbine yesterday, and all week, in fact. It's a very regular route. It is still unbelievably congested, and if you're suggesting that you've made changes to make it better, I'm not seeing that. So in that purpose, when you're looking at that, where do you go, and more specifically on the transportation side, the safety on roads when you have that kind of congestion and frustration from motorists just trying to get through? How do you reconcile that with the installation of a bike lane? And this, as I said, it's safer for cyclists, but it's much more dangerous for pedestrians and people on the road.
Through the speaker, in the case of Woodbine, our after study saw that we had less than a minute impact on the morning and the midday travel time, but in the afternoon we did see upwards of 2.5 minutes impact on travel time through the length of the corridor. I recognize that now, this week, last week, is probably a heightened demand to use Woodbine and more congestion on Woodbine because of the closures on the Don Valley Parkway. There's multiple lane closures related to bridge work that's happening. So I would expect that Woodbine is an overflow route for that traffic. But we do look at those, as I said, and make adjustments, and we have seen improvement to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff. I think Deputy Mayor Min Wong was asking about warrants in terms of determining whether or not the bike lanes were needed and whether or not you tested that, and if you put them in, they weren't being utilized and so on. I was out of the room, so I really didn't hear your answer to that. So whether or not you'd go back and review and make a determination as to whether or not they would stay in place if they're not being utilized?
Through the speaker, we don't currently have warrants for the installation of bike lanes and bike facilities. Part of the reason why we've approached the cycling network plan the way we've approached it is because we've done a very thorough analysis that not only covers existing use, but it also covers latent demand and potential use. And as Jacqueline mentioned in the description of Richmond Adelaide and many of the other cycling facilities that we've installed as part of the first cycling network plan, when we build the safe facility in a location where there may be limited cyclists who are using it at that time, once we build it, we tend to see, in some cases, quite a significant amount of growth. And so we wanted to just indicate that existing cyclists are not a good indicator of what the network connectivity can actually yield in terms of cycling safety and cycling numbers.
Right. Now, I know and understand that there are plans afoot coming forward for more bike lanes and or expansion on Lawrence Avenue, particularly across Victoria Park, going over towards Brimley Road. I'm wondering whether or not the plans include a physical separation, a barrier of some kind that I see in many places. I've seen in China, I've seen in Montreal, I've seen in New York, I've seen many other places. I don't see many of them in Toronto. So I'm just wondering what are the plans there and whether or not I need to move a motion here. Because if you're going to put them on Lawrence Avenue, I'd like to see a physical separation, a barrier that protects the cyclists in a much more safe manner.
Based on the speed and volume of car traffic on Lawrence, we would recommend a separated cycling facility or a cycle track. That would be what we would bring forward for consultation and approval.
So similar to your request, that would be our proposal, that we would bring a separated facility forward for review and council approval.
Okay. I guess my final question, and this one is a touchy one because I think 12 years ago I may have moved a motion about licensing cyclists and so on. And I know, I'm not suggesting that we're doing that, but I'm just simply asking, I'm asking the question, what exactly would be required if we were to look at that? And I ask the question based on the following. I've had numerous complaints of residents saying to me that they have had near misses and so on. And in fact, I think in Councillor Karagiannis' ward, an older woman was killed actually at Shepherd and Kennedy a few years ago because she was actually knocked down by a cyclist riding on the sidewalk. And so I guess the question was, well, can we license them? I know we looked at it some time ago and the answer we got was no good one. I'm just wondering whether or not if technology has evolved in such a way to allow us to have a greater understanding in terms of how to know who's riding and whether or not there is any opportunity to look at that.
As you've mentioned, council has looked at this and staff have done reviews of this several times in the past.
Yes.
I'm not aware of any major city in North America or even in the Western world that does license cyclists today. It would be quite challenging and costly. It would likely cost more to administer than you would receive in funds from the license fees. If it were something that were to be undertaken, it would most likely be better in the purview of the province, just like a driver's license. But it's not something that the police feel that they need in order to enforce traffic infractions against cyclists. The police have reviewed this issue and indicated that they have the powers that they need to receive identification and charge cyclists, and they regularly do so. The situation you're describing is a challenging one because when an individual is hit and that person is gone, if someone did have a license, would that person be able to see it? It's not clear, and I know that there have been a few cases in the GTA where that kind of sidewalk cycling has resulted in a tragic death or injury, and I know, and the ones that I'm aware of, the person has eventually either come forward or been caught. I'm not sure if the situation you're describing is like that, but in all, we don't recommend licensing for a number of challenging reasons because of jurisdiction and what age would it be applicable, many thany
I also think, Councillor, that our partners at Cycle Toronto and many others across the city are really focused up and working on education to cyclists. And I think what the crux of it is around safety and making sure that people are sharing the road appropriately. And I think education is a critical component of doing that. And as we know from driver's licensing, which only happens maybe once in a lifetime or maybe twice, that's not necessarily the best way to educate people about the daily operation of their vehicle on the street.
Particularly if education can be taken into the school system, that would be I know it was in the past, if kids can be taught about the rules of the road right from the get-go in elementary school, that would be a best way to achieve safe infrastructure compliance.
Thank you. Councillor Karagiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff, what is there that exists should an accident happen between a bicyclist and a vehicle, a bicyclist and a pedestrian? And if the bicyclist is at fault, what insurance is there in order to protect the public? Is there such a demand on the bicyclist?
Through the speaker, if the cyclist has violated the rules of the road and has contributed to a crash, they are eligible for a ticket or a citation or a fee or a fine, depending on what the Toronto Police would indicate their assessment of the situation would indicate. So they are charged in the same way that anybody would be.
Right, but a car, a vehicle, if you cause an accident, you have insurance, and your insurance covers the damages that you cause. If you're a bicyclist and you cause an accident, what insurance is there in order for the other people that got hit, or the other people that died, or the other people that any damages to their property?
My understanding is that it would be the same situation if you were in an accident or collision with an uninsured driver, where there's a component of insurance that deals with uninsured drivers, and people would be charged through the Highway Traffic Act and any criminal code convictions, but the insurance side would be dealt with in the same way as if an uninsured driver was in that collision.
Let me try this one more time. I'm driving, I hit somebody, my insurance covers my damages, their damages. I'm a bicyclist, I'm driving, I hit a pedestrian. The pedestrian has damages to their selves, to a property. What is there that the bicyclist, what insurance does the bicyclist have in order to cover those damages? Is there such a thing?
I'm not entirely sure on this point. It may be that the cyclist who has licensed insurance on their own car, there may be some coverage there depending on the way their insurance is set up. The secondary way would be that the pedestrian would sue the cyclist for damages.
Most cyclists, sorry, Councillor, most cyclists are also operate cars, are also vehicle operators, and so many cyclists have driver's licenses and they have insurance coverage, and depending on that plan, there's various levels of coverage for their action on the road.
I don't drive a car, I'm a cyclist, I live in an apartment, I have nothing to my name except the place that I go to work. I hit somebody, that person dies. Comparably, if I'm a driver, if I have a car, I have to have insurance. Does that bicyclist also has insurance to cover the damages that the bicyclist causes?
Yeah, in the same way that a pedestrian wouldn't necessarily have insurance, the cyclist wouldn't necessarily have to have insurance, but they might. And again, individual policies would have a different approach to how they address those issues.
But through the staff.
And Jacqueline, I think, defined some of the potential cases.
Through the chair to staff, in all due respect, a pedestrian walking down the street hits somebody, it doesn't cause the same accident and the same damages that a bicyclist can cause. So, one more time, please. Is there something that is mandatory for the cyclist to have insurance because they're operating a vehicle?
As Jacqueline mentioned, they'd be counted as an uninsured driver if they didn't have insurance to cover them, which many of them very well might.
So then, to clarify, if I'm wrong, just please correct me. Somebody that drives a bicycle, if they don't have insurance, the person that gets hit can sue them, and good luck in getting anything from them.
That would be correct. Thankfully, that doesn't happen very often, but you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Perruzza.
The name. Thanks, Speaker. I just, a couple of questions. As a suburban cyclist, I think we, as suburban representatives, have failed in this regard. We don't have, and we don't think about when we plan our cycling network to integrate, think of the city as a whole. We've missed these wonderful opportunities along the rail corridors to build cycle superhighways connecting the outer reaches of the city with the core of the city. For those of us who like cycling. And so we build these little sort of one-off.
Question.
Yeah, the question to our staff is, when are they going to save us from ourselves?
Speak for yourself.
Through the Speaker, if the councillor's asking about why we aren't planning more trails along rail corridors, would that be your question, councillor?
My question is, why is it that we are not pursuing not that you haven't thought about it, but we are not pursuing building cycle lanes next to rail corridors that connect the city from one end to the other, that make it fast for a cyclist, someone like me or like Stephen Holiday, who's fit as a fiddle there, to get on his bike from the outer reaches of Etobicoke and get down here lickety-split. Like, why aren't we doing it? Why are we doing all these one-offs, you know, killing ourselves doing these, like, bicycle lanes that go from nowhere to nowhere, especially in the suburbs, and not thinking about doing the big cycle lanes connecting the city from one end to the other?
Councillor, that's a great question, and that's why the attachment to the major citywide cycling routes is so important. It's about defining those major corridors. Many of those that are on that map on attachment 2 are routes along either rail corridors or hydro corridors, and so we're currently working on extension of the Western Rail Path, which is a trail along the rail corridor as well as along the Barrie GO line. We're open to exploring more. There are challenges with property ownership and rail line expansion plan with Fourth Track and RER. There are some safety and proximity requirements around trails because ensuring sufficient space from where the cycling facility is compared to where the active tracks are. But we also have major expansions along hydro corridors or existing trails along hydro corridors to serve that need, which we are expanding to connect across the whole city. So the Gatineau hydro corridor will ultimately go all the way from Rouge Park down to meet the East Don Trail. And the Finch hydro corridor is we've been actively expanding, and it's almost going across the whole top of the city. We have plans on the expansion to the Gatineau through the Meadoway project in partnership with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority and the Warden hydro corridor as well, which is a north-south route.
So I've been here now, this is going on my 4th term. And when I initially met with you folks when I first got elected to talk about completing the Humber Trail around the golf course just south of Wilson Avenue, or the 401 rather. It's going on now 13 or 14 years. You've had plans to build these lines along the rail corridors and all the rest of it for as long as I can remember, 20, 25 years, and they haven't moved one iota. Like, they haven't moved forward an inch, other than being like lines on the map and saying that we're doing it, but it hasn't gone anywhere. When are we actually going to stop doing that and do something about it? Actually talk to somebody and say, let's move this forward, right? Let's bring forward a plan that kind of makes sense and connects the city one end to the other so that cyclists, people who love cycling, can get on their bikes and get places.
Through the Speaker, Councillor, thank you for your passionate support of these connections. We have completed several projects that I've mentioned, like the Gatineau Trail was connected between Victoria Park and Eglinton since 2016. We also have completed further sections, 2 sections of the Etobicoke Creek Trail, and just before 2016, 1 section of the Humber Gap. There's 1 section of Mid-Humber Gap, which I know that you're quite supportive of, that we have hired TRCA to do a feasibility study of, because there are some property issues there. But we're working on that, and we're going to be briefing local councillors, including yourself, about that within the next couple of months. And then we're going to be initiating a municipal class environmental assessment to proceed with the construction of, or the detailed design and construction. There is private landowner engagement of single-family homes in that neighborhood, so it's very challenging. I mentioned the challenges with some of the rail lines, but we have been moving forward on many of these projects.
Councillor Cole.
Thank you. I wasn't going to speak, but Councillor Peruzza sort of...
No, but you're asking questions. You're not...
Oh, yeah, that's why I'm going to ask a question. I wasn't going to ask a question, but Councillor Peruzza really twigged my interest here. The question I have, he's talking about building cycling paths along north-south rail lines and golf courses and everything. I'm more interested in going east-west. You know, if you look at, I think there's a number of north-south cycling trails. Why aren't there more east-west connectors, especially across Middle Toronto? Everybody forgets about Middle Toronto. It's always downtown. What about Middle Toronto? We want to go east-west. What about more east-west connectors?
Where do you want to go?
I want to go to North Park. the North Park Greenbelt in Councillor Nunziata's ward. I can't get there because there's a railway bridge.
Get in your car, drive there.
The major citywide cycling route map in attachment 2 identifies Eglinton and Lawrence as key midtown east-west connectors. And then, of course, the trails that you mentioned, the Beltline trails, are also critical for local communities. And on the Eglinton, it's a great example where we have a multi-use trail, 10 kilometers of which from Jane to Rakeley. We are building in 2019 a segment from Jane to Perrin Park. We are going to be having a multi-use trail built as part, the separated cycle track will be built as part of the Eglinton Crosstown Light Rail Project.
Okay, stop right there.
Yep.
That's great. But I'm talking about Middle Toronto. I'm talking about the Toronto south of the 401 there. It's almost like a no man's land there. We need some east-west connectors across the middle of this city. And I want to be able to get from Baycrest Park. I want to get to the wonderful hidden park that Frances Nunziata has there in North Park. We can't get to it. She's keeping it sort of separated from us. I want to get across to it.
That's why it's hidden.
Well, maybe I want it that way.
Frances.
That's right. She doesn't want you in. Her hidden park is her park.
Through the speaker, the key major citywide cycling routes that really do the cross-city connections in Midtown are Eglinton and Lawrence. There are some routes in the network plan that you'll see in attachment 1 that make the connection to North Park that you're referring to. There are 2 options. One of the options involves building a whole new bridge to connect to North Park, and that's something that would require property and an environmental assessment. It would be quite an extensive project, and so it's something that we have in our proposed plan, and we're happy to work with you about opportunities, but it's not within the near-term plan right now.
Yeah, and that's why I think the question I'd like to ask, shouldn't we perhaps have some kind of long-term visioning plan whereby we start to look 10 years, 20 years ahead? Because I know in my ward there in the Dufferin-Yorkdale area, there's a lot of development being proposed. So if we don't start to have sort of a long-term vision there, we're going to lose opportunities as these developments go forward to sort of work with the developers to protect these green rights-of-way cycling routes east-west.
Through the speaker, yes, that's having a long-term vision is exactly what the cycling network plan is. It takes us out of the constraint of a 10-year plan and keeps it as a fully long-term vision, even at projects that are more conceptual that we may or may not build within 10 years. And then it has a short-term detailed implementation program for 3 years. So the projects that you mentioned are in our long-term plan, so we can protect for them and think about them as development opportunities arise.
So you have no problem with my motion that I'm going to move to look at a long-term connector to Councillor Nunziata's hidden park there, the North Park.
That motion, it already is in our plan to look at that. It's on map 1, and I pointed out to your staff where exactly on map 1 it is. We have a challenge that it cannot be done within the near-term program, and so that would be our concern with your motion, is that the near-term program timing won't work for that particular project.
So therefore, near-term is how many years?
3.
3? So then mine would be how many years if I'm trying to get you to look at the long term?
What I've proposed to your staff is that I've given some wording about a motion that has us reporting back at the end of this near-term program about some appropriate timing and opportunities for that particular link. And so Councillor Layton at Infrastructure and Environment Committee proposed that we report back in Q4 2021. I would suggest that we refer to the timing of that project at that time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Tory?
Oh, he's got a good motion on cycling calendar.
Yeah, I wrote that for him.
I know. That was a lot.
Mayor Tory to speak.
Very much, Madam Speaker, and I have a motion, which I don't actually have in front of me. Oh, there it is. I've gone through this exercise we all have of having people tell me, and I heard on the radio the other day a commentator saying, well, nobody really uses those Richmond and Adelaide bike lanes at all. My experience in going into that very same radio station, which happens to be on Richmond Street, is that I have to wait 4 minutes for a break in the bike traffic many days to get across the street to go into the radio station. So I felt that by having and this is not something that would be unique to Toronto. Other cities have, in major places, put bike counting. I think in Montreal, in fact, you can see they have great big signs that actually count, and the count is shown to you as it goes, so that you can see the usage. And there may be some other place where we'd put up this bike counting technology, and it would show there isn't much traffic, which would at least allow us to have that information. And I think, we tend to make better decisions around here when we have this kind of information that is, pretty much unarguable. I mean, people are either using them or they're not, depending on what it is. I will just say with respect to this matter in general, Speaker, that before my time, and even during the beginning of my time here, we've had many big plans. And the big plans almost inevitably contain some blockbuster number and go over a very long period of time. And I would say, I believe, and I know there are others who would take issue with this, and I'll come to that in a moment in terms of the same sort of situation we faced yesterday in terms of a balancing of interests when we were talking about the Vision Zero, that there has been quite a lot done. But at the same time, if you measured it as against these big plans that have been presented over time, actually part of the problem with the big plans is, first of all, they were very big, they were very long, and it was hard to measure, quite frankly, whether what was committed to by the council was actually done. And I'm going to come back to that because I think we've got something different here today that is going to be much more easily measurable, that we know what it is we're approving, and it'll be much easier for us to be held to account for doing these things or not. But my intention would be to see us do them. But as usual, with this topic, as with many others, and the longer you're here, the more you learn this is the way it is, I have people saying of my leadership on this and the posture that I've taken vis-a-vis this, some saying we're doing way too much. As you've seen in recent days, I'm now appointed, anointed, and celebrated as the leader of the latest war on the car, which is utter rubbish. But having said all that, I'm anointed by some as that, and then there are other people who would say that our efforts with respect to bikes are the bare minimum and not even making that standard. And so I'm assuming in terms of the steady, actually achieved progress, actually places where you have built trails and bike lanes and filled in gaps and done things, that we're probably in about the right place vis-a-vis something that I said yesterday was an important part of how I try to lead, which is that I think that you have to try to get out there as much as you can and do as much as you can to take account of an evolving city, but you can't lose the public's confidence, because if you do, then everybody in here starts to get under pressure, and some will acknowledge that pressure more than others, but the bottom line is it will affect the decision-making that can go on in here to try and move us forward. And as I've said, people can agree or disagree with that particular style of leadership. They will have their chance at the time of the next election to pass judgment on that, and I'm more than willing to have them do that. So, as I said yesterday, we have to sort of then try to do what we can do to have a plan that can be measured by people in terms of what actually gets done. And I think the key points I want to look at and point to in my one remaining minute on this plan are the following. First, there are 3 years set forward of very specific projects that are enumerated. And I was going to say they're either going to get done or they're not going to get done. I am very determined to see them get done. And so let's say they're going to get done. But if they're not done, people will see very clearly what didn't get done, as opposed to some 10-year thing where you can say, well, yeah, well, that's in year 9 and that hasn't been done yet, and so forth and so on. The second thing that is in this report, and I'm not trying to boil it down to only 2 things, there's much in it, is that there is an expeditious proceeding with 2 other major corridor studies that are major projects that are on the city's list of items, and that is, of course, Bloor West and the Danforth. And I think that taking the next step and moving those forward is a significant step forward. That is something that is going to happen now, not 7 years from now or not 5 years from now. So I think you have a plan that, in addition to those 2 things, fills in gaps and also moves at least 2 major initiatives forward. So I'm hopeful that people will end up, I know there'll be some motions, but I'm hopeful people will end up supporting this as being something that does those 2 things. Moves significant individual projects forward, and secondly, moves 2 very big initiatives forward, as well as I'll call it a selection of other matters that form this plan. So I thank you for your attention, and I commend this report to the members of council.
Thank you. We do have a question for you.
Of course.
Oh, Councillor Perks, you did have your name. You took your name off? Okay. Councillor Ainsley?
Yep. Mayor Tory, great motion. Can we just add 3 words to it, mandatory open data? So they're released in an open data set?
You know what? Yes, because I think we have been, when people have come and asked for our data, we've kind of found reasons sometimes not to make it public, and I think we're behind where this city should be and where other cities are in terms of data sets that are made public. So if you figure out the place where that should go, then I'm quite happy to do that, because I think that that should be the, by and large, the hallmark that we set in almost all cases. There may be some that don't fall. Yes, so the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Tory. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Cressy to speak.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I held the item, Councillor. Thank you, Speaker, and let me begin by thanking staff for their hard work. I would step back to say, what is our objective here as it relates to the cycling network plan? And our objectives should be pretty damn simple, which is, in a growing city, we need to work to redesign our streets from, in the old days, moving cars, to, in the 21st century, moving people. It's just that simple. It is the only solution in a growing city to shift the mode. And so let me talk about that from a downtown perspective and a citywide perspective. In downtown, 250,000 people live downtown. I'm one of them. But every single workday, from Monday to Friday, the population of downtown quadruples to 1 million people. 1 million people. That's because 1/3 of all the jobs in the entire city are located downtown. Many of your constituents commute into downtown to work. It's also going to increase that pressure because 43% of all the city's non-residential development is in downtown. Meanwhile, if you try to drive to City Hall, or you tried this morning, you will know that our streets are at capacity today. And good luck widening them to bring more cars through and into the downtown. The only way, from a safety and a long-term economic prosperity standpoint, that we can effectively move people in and out of the core, to their jobs, to their schools, is by shifting the mode and redesigning our streets. That's it. And it's working. People have voted with their bike lanes. You just have to look at Richmond and Adelaide. Go stand at Bathurst and Adelaide during rush hour and see how it's going. Go up to Bloor Street when it's not under construction right now, and you will see how it's working. Now, on a citywide basis, which is where, admittedly, in this council chamber, a lot of these debates over cycling infrastructure take place, you have to build a grid. You have to build an actual network. If somebody is getting on a bike from their household in the morning, they have to be able to ride to the childcare to drop their kid off, ride to work to their place of employment, go back to the childcare, maybe stop at a store on the way home. You have to be able to do all of those. And so you cannot build in a piecemeal fashion. You can't build bike lanes to nowhere. You actually have to build a grid. And so when I look at this bike plan, I will say, and I will commend the near-term objectives, the next 3 years. Extending Bloor West all the way to High Park. Let's get it done. Piloting a bike lane on Danforth to make that strong east-west connection. Let's get it done. Studying and bringing university back online. Let's get it done. That's all important. I will say, and I believe that our medium-term plan and targets are lacking, and it's because there are no clear targets or accountability measures to hold us to them. But over the next 3 years, we have a work plan, so let's go out and build it. Now, a lot of the debate we're having right now comes down to this question of warrants. So let's address it head on, and I would encourage all of you to support Councillor Layton's amendment coming up to delete them. We don't have warrants for sidewalks. We don't have warrants for whether cars can be on roads. So why the proposed double standard by the Deputy Mayor? It is nothing more than a poison pill and to create another reason to say no to building bike lanes and that grid. Frankly, it is a byproduct of the old 20th century debates about bike lanes, whereas where we're moving is into the 21st century of moving people and redesigning our streets. And so I would close by saying that it is long past time that this chamber, this council, moves past the debates of old, the cars versus bikes, false dichotomy. In fact, I think last term we put those debates to bed. Richmond and Adelaide and the Bloor bike lane gave you all the data you need from every vantage point to understand that in a growing world-class city, you You redesign our streets to move more people and more people safely. And in this term, let's move forward to not just pilot bike lanes. The data's in, the evidence is there. Let's build permanent bike lanes, and let's do it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Matlow.
Through you, Madam Speaker, I have two motions. One is to delete number 19, which would allow for bicyclists to use sidewalks. And then number two, I'm moving to provide a budget impact assessment of completing the city portion of the cycling network as envisaged in Eglinton Connects and report through the 2020 budget process. And I'll start with the second item. Eglinton Connects is a bike lane that will connect all former municipalities as part of Metro Toronto east-west. And Metrolinx, we have an agreement with Metrolinx that they are going to be putting together the streetscape, the sidewalk, and the bike lanes where there are stations. Our concern is that if we don't finish our part of it in concert with what Metrolinx will do by 2021, then we will end up with these orphan segments of bike lanes along Eglinton that will create an unsafe environment because bicyclists will begin and then get off and then begin and then get off, and that doesn't seem to be a reasonable resolution, given that everything we've heard from our bicycling staff and our transportation staff is that contiguous networks is our goal as a council. Number two, or the number one, to remove the sidewalk idea. If you look at the Ontario Highway Traffic Act, while it doesn't actually speak to the sidewalk question, it does identify bicycles as vehicles just like cars. And not one of us would ever suggest that a vehicle, a car, should be allowed to drive on the sidewalk. I can tell you, if I was walking down a sidewalk with my 6-year-old daughter, or if I or any of you had a mobility challenge, or if you're pushing a stroller, if you're in a wheelchair, if you've got a bad hip, if you're a young person or a senior alike, the last thing that you are going to want is somebody cycling quickly down a sidewalk. I think it's an unreasonable and unsafe suggestion to make, and it's something that we should dismiss immediately. And then to speak to the wider issue, I too, I've never really understood why we allow ourselves to fall into this just absurdly divisive debate about a cycling network. It really, it's stupid if you really describe it honestly. Maybe it's self-serving. I think some of us say things because we're worried more about if we're going to get screamed at by some people rather than really what the right thing is to do. Some others not, but I think that probably plays into some of the things that are said around here, like the war on this and the war on that. If anything, can we all agree that we want people to be safe? Because if we all agree that we want people to be safe, then we want to create sidewalks that are safe for people. And we want roads to be safe for drivers, and we want roads to be safe for pedestrians, and we want roads to be safe for cyclists. An advantage the drivers have is that when I drive, I've got this metal around me that separates me and protects me, and I appreciate that. But a pedestrian and a cyclist doesn't have that, and therefore I believe we have a responsibility to create distances and separations to be able to protect people from vehicles, other types of vehicles, and that's why we do that for bikes, and that's why sidewalks should be for pedestrians. So if we all agree that safety is our priority, I mean, we all just said that in our speeches during the Vision Zero debate, why wouldn't we be consistent? Why wouldn't we do the same here? I don't know, I really do find this debate tiresome and frustrating and again, just stupid. I read Mark Toohey, and I don't usually read stuff that Mark Toohey writes, but I read what he wrote about John Tory and all that kind of stuff that the mayor alluded to earlier. And again, like, talk about stupid. Like, that's just trying to light fires to get people upset and be provocative, and, you know, I mean, to like, people who have absolutely, like, they're just looking for attention. And again, why, like, just pay no attention to that crap, really.
Thank
Don't
you.
get scared of it either.
Thank you, Councillor Matlow.
An article in your future,
Yeah.
Councillor Matlow,
Yeah,
we do have questions.
sure.
Madam
Councillor
Speaker-
Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm a little confused. I've seen a couple of different motions going up. I was wondering if we can have them up again, please, and I can ask for a clarification. Motion number... Are you proposing here, sorry, not this one, there's something about being able to write on sidewalks. Is that one of your motions? I'm
No,
sorry.
I'm doing the opposite.
Okay, so you did not suggest that we allow bicyclists to on sidewalks?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks.
His motion is to delete the recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker.
Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Yes, thank you. The committee recommendations, does that motion say that to have a pilot project to look at allowing cyclists on all sidewalks?
No.
No, it doesn't. Which streets does it, which sidewalks does it propose to have a pilot project on?
It could be the sidewalk that my kid's walking down.
No, Madam Chair, does not the motion say it should be on sidewalks where there's very little traffic, pedestrian traffic? Isn't that what it says?
Yeah.
So there, are you aware, not like Yonge Street in Mount Pleasant, there are certain places in the suburbs where there is virtually no pedestrian traffic?
Is that something you want to encourage?
No, are you aware that there are streets where there's that there's virtually no pedestrian traffic?
So do your job, animate the sidewalks, have development that has great retail along the streets,
Councillor Matlow.
have safe sidewalks, public realm, great bike lanes, and then we make a vibrant city and correct the mistakes of poor planning in some of
I'd
our
ask for
inner suburban
a point of
areas.
privilege,
Councillor
Madam Chair. I'd ask for an
Matlow,
apology.
please. The councillor is asking you a question.
No, he
It
said
was
do your
responsible.
job.
Yeah, and-
He's inferring that I'm not doing my
No,
job. I'd ask
exact-
for an apology.
Okay, exactly, and that's exactly what I was going to
Can I
do.
please have,
That's exactly
you.
what I was going to do. Councillor Matlow, could you please apologize and retract that comment, please?
I won't apologize, but I'll retract it.
You're retracting?
no, I'd
will.
like an apology, Madam Chair.
You apologize, Councillor?
I don't believe that any of us are doing our job if we don't, if we're suggesting that
Madam Chair, on a point of
because
privilege, he
there
said
are
I'm not- he
fewer
said
rather
do
than
your
more
job.
people
He was
walking
saying
down a
me.
sidewalk, that we should turn them into business
Councillor,
streets.
Councillor Matlow, I'm asking you, could you please apologize to the deputy
He
mayor?
said do your job.
Yeah,
That's-
Councillor, please.
Thank you.
Please. Councillor Matlow, please.
I don't, it would be dishonest because I wouldn't believe it. Like, I do retract it to avoid this debate, but I actually don't believe that he's doing his job as a representative that should focus on
Madam
safety.
Chair.
Okay, Councillor.
I just don't, I'm just being
Okay.
sincere with you. I really
Councillor
don't.
Matlow, you're going a little too far now. I'm asking you to apologize. Or I'm going to have to ask you to leave if you don't apologize.
I can't do it with sincerity. So you'll have to do what you have to do, and I respect that, but I can't.
Okay? All right. Next speaker, Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise, and I'll just let you know I'll be supporting the mayor's motion. I think that's a great idea, as well as Councillor Matlow's and Councillor Layton's motion that will be forthcoming. I don't think this should be a conversation that's about clickbait. I think it's time for Toronto to grow up and prioritize safety, prioritize active transportation, and do it in a thoughtful and smart way. I do want to give thanks to our staff here, Barbara, Jacqueline, Katie, Sibel, and many others for the work on this. I think building out our cycling network has historically been one of the most challenging things that's been facing Toronto, and at times it feels like a Sisyphean effort, kind of pushing that boulder up the hill. But we are making real progress, and we have to move forward. We had a good plan for the city, and I think staff have done something that can be difficult and challenging at times, and that is recognizing how things were going and providing us with the advice that we need to recalibrate. We need to retool. And that's not a bad thing. In my mind, that's a pragmatic thing. Understanding what's been working, what hasn't been working, and charting a new path forward. The network plan update that we're voting on here today is asking us to stay firm in our goals of creating a strong citywide network that meets the needs of all road users. And that's the point of emphasis. We're talking more and more about complete streets. We're talking about Vision Zero, and we're actually taking action on these items. What the update gives us is a way to strategically deliver our highest priority cycling routes. And I've always said not all bike lanes are created equally, and we see that across the city. Some there is a lot of latent demand for, there's a lot of potential, and other areas less so. I think we should be focusing and driving our efforts and our resource and our time onto those bike lanes that are going to get the most people using them. And while I and some of my colleagues here on council are fully ready to embrace a citywide network of cycling lanes and infrastructure, not every community is. We need to take the time to do the consultation and the engagement to bring people along with us to set us up for success. We can all point to examples in the City of Toronto where that hasn't happened, where it hasn't gone well, and that's when these items become really controversial. Now, I know that that's a lot of work, but it's important work that we have to do. And just because that's challenging doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. In fact, we ought to and we have to. The most important reason that I'm rising here today is to speak on the item because I want to support my community in their call for a complete street on Danforth. And I was heartened, and I want to thank our mayor for his recognition of Danforth as one of the top 2 priorities in the city. I think that's fantastic news. Now, when we were at committee, we heard from deputants over and over again about the call for a complete street on Danforth. We received 400+ correspondence, and I personally received hundreds of emails on the file. Every person that we heard from made one message very clear, and that is that road safety on Danforth is a priority. Danforth is one of the most heavily traveled cycling corridors in the city that doesn't currently have any bike infrastructure to support that. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. We've heard from our general manager talk about demand, desire, and latent potential, and certainly Danforth has tons of that. And it's also a critical piece in making that east-west cycling connection through the heart of our city. With multi-billion transit infrastructure right below Danforth and some of the city's most iconic neighborhoods, this makes sense to have a complete street in the East End. I want to thank Councillor McKelvey for tabling my motion at committee and recommendation number 6, calling for the design of a bike lane pilot on Danforth. We're going to come back in Q2 2020 with staff, and we're going to move it forward. After 40 years of studies and debates and delay on Danforth bike lanes, the committee gave its support by providing us a path to move forward on bringing a pilot to Danforth. I'm calling for staff to begin the consultation and the detailed design work early on the bike lane pilot now, so we can actually get started and get it moving. The work starts first and foremost with consultation with our community, with our BIAs, with residents, with people that use Danforth every day. And our work plan is robust and accounts for that with 5 public meetings, stakeholder advisory committee, 3 interest group meetings, pop-up consultations, monthly steering committee that myself and Councillor Fletcher will be sitting on. And after extensive consultation, at that point, we will be presented with a work plan that's thoughtful, that's smart, and makes sense to move forward. My original motion proposed that we look at Coxwell Avenue to Dawes Road for bike lanes on Danforth, and I was thrilled to see that Councillor Fletcher joined me in that call by including detailed design work for Broadview to Coxwell. Having an option for a continuous bike lane pilot across the busiest stretch of Danforth makes a lot of sense. We're building vital links, and I think we've heard today that when we don't have those connections, it doesn't make sense. I will wrap up and say we've had a lot of success on Bloor West, Adelaide, and Richmond, and I look forward to supporting more success on Danforth and other areas going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Madam Speaker, Nunziata.
Yes, thank you. I do have a motion. If I can ask staff to put it up. It's It's on IE, okay, on IE 6.11. Oh, there it is on the screen. City Council requests the General Manager of Transportation Services to review opportunities to prioritize Weston neighborhood connections cycling routes within the near-term implementation program 2020-2021, and that cycling network connections to the Weston Go and Up Express station be included as part of this work. And 2, City Council requests the General Manager of Transportation Services to consider including Jane Street south of 401 to Bloor Street West as a study plan for major cities cycling route as part of the next report back on the implementation progress of the cycling network plan. Staff has helped me with this motion. I just to speak in support of both items 11 and 12. I brought forward a report to committee a couple years ago from a cycling committee that I chaired as part of community members in my ward, and there were a number of recommendations that were brought forward to city staff on possible bike lanes throughout the ward, connection to where the Go and the Up Express station is at Weston and Lawrence. We also spoke to Metrolinx, asking them when they design the corridor for electrification that they allow space along the corridor for a bike lane as well. And Metrolinx agreed to that. I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but that was what we recommended. And we also put a motion through council a couple years ago on that corridor going north and south. There is a dedicated bike lane that's going in my ward now, and actually it's being constructed now, is Scarlet Road. Scarlet Road, for people that know that area, that has been a highway for many, many years. It's four-lane traffic, and there's no stops. Motorists are going 90, 95, down the hill and up the hill. So part of the city is reconstructing the road, and as well as putting in the sidewalks. Part of that is to reduce the lanes to 2 lanes. Then in the future, we're doing the underpass at St. Clair and Dundas, and that's part of Councillor Perks' ward as well. We're widening that underpass and putting the cycling lanes under the underpass as well. I did have a community meeting with my residents, which we had quite a few residents, and I have been communicating to my community for a number of years that this is in the works and that will happen when Scarlet Road gets reconstructed. And so there has been communication from my office to my community on the proposed project. And I believe that dedicated bike lanes, I prefer having dedicated bike lanes or not having any bike lanes at all. I feel it's a lot safer for motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists when you're driving. For example, Dundas is they don't have dedicated bike lanes, and it's very unsafe for motorists and as well as pedestrians. So in areas where, I think there are certain areas of the city that it warrants, and I think the community is embracing it. And the question was asked to staff, do you count the cyclists? How many cyclists do you have on a particular street before you recommend it? But there are some areas, for example, Scarlet Road, there may not be a lot of cyclists because it's unsafe. And why, why would you use the road if it's not unsafe for you? So you can't really, the criteria can't be on the number of cyclists, because there are some roads that are very unsafe, and I don't believe cyclists will even attempt to use those roads. So if you build them and it's safer for cyclists, you'll have them use the roadway. So I will be supporting both 11 and 12 and the recommendations, and I hope members of council will support my amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm hoping you can come back to the chair because my colleagues have agreed that I could go next.
Councillor Carroll to speak.
Thank you. I appreciate this, Madam Speaker. Thanks to my colleagues, because I have to step out early to talk about yesterday's accident. Madam Speaker, I don't have a motion. Like you, I rise in support of motions that deal with getting rid of the recommendation that we introduce a warrant system, getting rid of the recommendation that we do a sidewalk bicycling pilot. I'm very much in support of those. And I wanted to comment, Madam Speaker, on Mayor Tory's having been dubbed the new general in the war on the car. This isn't about cars, and it isn't even really about bikes. It's actually just about people. It's about people. And one of the things that we have to wrap our heads around in Vision Zero, in the overall network plan, in the specific projects that we're starting, is we're dealing with very, very different travelers than when I grew up. Let's think about it. Those of us, and there are a fair number that are of my generation in this room right now, we had parents for whom it was a big deal to buy a car. And when my family moved to Don Mills, the biggest traffic jam in the neighborhood was all the wives driving the single car just to the corner where the bus was. And then all the businessmen who looked exactly alike in the exactly same suit jumped on the Lawrence 54 and went over to where the subway ended at Eglinton and all went downtown to a pretty small little cluster of office buildings. That was the 60s. And all the arteries were lovely, big, fast roads, and we thought, you know, sooner or later we're going to have this affluent nation and people are going to have 2 cars. Let's build some great big roads for it. And we did. And pretty much every child in that neighborhood knew that one day they were going to learn to drive, they were going to drive their parents' car, then they were going to buy a car, and if they worked really hard and they went to post-secondary, they were going to own 2 cars. But that's not what my children are doing. I have a daughter in her 30s who lives downtown and doesn't want a car. And so when she's walking the streets, she sort of remembers what I taught her about the perspective of the car driver, but she doesn't have that perspective. She's never been the driver. We have a number of people who are pedestrians. They maybe can't afford a bike, or they're a pedestrian today, but they own a car, and they've never cycled down a busy street. So they don't have the perspective of the cyclist they're sharing the road with. They may not own a car and they don't have that perspective. 2 vehicles, 2 different types of vehicles are sharing the road with them, but they don't know what they see. And that's relatively unique, because we used to all grow up assuming we'd all have the same journey, and we don't anymore. There are 3 million of us. Soon there will be 4 million, and some of us will never own a car, some will never ride a bike. But we all have to inhabit the same road network. We have to figure out how to navigate around buses that are sharing the road, and we're going to need a lot of those, because God knows when the rail is ever going to be built, that we're all anticipating. But then it will be built, and we'll be navigating around that construction. That's what this plan has to accommodate. And it's why I refuse to say, let's have a warrant system. Let's have a warrant system for bicycles. And then if anybody phones me and says, I want a bike lane on this route, I'll say, well, I don't care what that road's designed for right now, get on it, because I want to get you a bike lane, so you need to meet the warrants. Start pedaling on it, start riding it right now. It's the same way when a parent says, this crosswalk is unsafe, we're worried one of our kids is going to get killed one of these days, I need a crossing guard. Would I say, well, throw your kids in that street, get them in there, I need there to be X number of kids so I can get the crossing guard. That's a system that's not working for us now, which is why when I asked the question, you heard our transportation director said, yeah, in some respects we use warrants for pedestrians, but we are re-examining that, because it's actually a stupid way to figure out where you need to address unsafe pedestrian conditions. So they're actually retreating from that. The only thing that warrants do really work for are cars. Because in a collision of these 3 types of travelers, these walkers, these cyclers, these drivers, generally speaking, the person, because they're all people, but the person behind a wheel has the greatest chance of winning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, Councillor Matlow has approached me, and he would like to apologize to you. Councillor Matlow?
With feeling, I truly apologize.
Well, would like to is an overstatement, but I feel that I must.
Come on, Councillor
In
Matlow,
order to be able to vote on an item that I care about. I apologize to Councillor Minnan-Wong for the comment that I made earlier with regard to doing your job and everything else that I may have said or thought about him today, in the past, or in the future.
The future.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion related to a long-term request in the old Ward 9, the current Ward 6. I don't think you need me to read this, but obviously it's important in any kind of cycling plan to have connectivity. This motion addresses some of the key requests that have come over the years, which we've been unable to implement. I hope in this iteration of the cycling plan we can do so. I'd like to thank staff for the report and the work on the file. There's no doubt that we can go down this road because of an enormous cultural or paradigm shift within our local communities. There's been a growing acceptance of cycling because of the growing demand for off-street trails, segregated bike lanes, and better, more public consultation. In other words, we're not imposing bike lanes, we're asking communities what they would like to see and what they would like to see designed. And also, I think it can be said that newcomers to our city are bringing a culture of cycling from their home countries. Boomers are now seeing that their millennial kids are not buying cars, are not getting their license, and are in fact buying bikes and biking around the city. Of course, increasing congestion across the city makes a bike a practical and efficient mode of transportation. Certainly when I'm biking around York Centre and Ward 6, it is much easier to get around by bike than often driving. I think when you look ahead, if we want biking to be a citywide thing, then we have to share. And that brings me to Bike Share, which I understand is a Toronto Parking Authority program and not necessarily out of transportation. But whenever the inner suburbs start asking about Bike Share, they're told the volume isn't enough, the budget isn't there, they may build up DCs. When I recently asked about a connection between the two subway lines, I was told that they're collecting DCs to do the connection. When I asked how long that would take, they said 10 years. Well, that doesn't seem fair, that doesn't seem reasonable, and that doesn't seem like a good way to promote cycling. I think also we have to make sure we understand where the risk is in cycling. In this fascinating report of the Office of the Chief Coroner of Ontario, which looked at cycling death review, look at all accidentally cycling deaths in Ontario from January 1st to 2006 to January 31st, 2010. And I think we can learn a lot from some of the hypotheses and recommendations. Cycling deaths are more likely to occur during the spring and summer months. Cycling deaths are more likely to occur to those not wearing helmets. Cycling deaths are more likely to occur when the cyclist or driver involved in a collision with a cyclist is using a mobile handheld device. Cycling deaths are more likely to occur when one or more persons involved in the collision are under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and the vast majority of cycling deaths are preventable. So we can put millions of dollars into our cycling infrastructure, and we're certainly approving that today. And I think the plan going forward is ambitious, but it should be fair. It should be connecting unconnected routes. It should be going into the inner suburbs, but we must also focus on the safety. And public education is really one of the key things in making sure that our school-age children and adults understand the rules of the road, safety, and the bylaws and the strategies going forward. Therefore, we can build a cycling culture based on good infrastructure, good education, and good safety. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cole to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a motion I'd like to move. That City Council requests the General Manager of Transportation Services to consider the feasibility of and timing of a pedestrian and cycling bridge at Bentworth over the rail line in order to connect the Baycrest Park, Yorkdale area to North Park, and as part of the report proposed for late 2021 to update the Infrastructure and Environment Committee on the implementation progress of the cycling network plan. I'm moving this because as representing the middle of Toronto, the area of Toronto that perhaps sometimes doesn't get the necessary cycling infrastructure it needs and wants, I just thought this would be a way of trying to highlight the need to invest in future cycling investments, network investments in an east-west manner south of the 401. I know the report here talks about the very important contribution and investment in the Danforth cycling network lane, and that's great. We're all in favor of that, and the reality is most cyclists are in the downtown core of the city, but we need to start investing in future cycling lanes and segregated cycling networks east and west in the middle of the city. Because in the future, we will benefit by that rather than everybody being so car-oriented because they don't have an alternative. So that's what this motion of mine tries to do. Because if we don't start doing this long-range planning, if you look at the development that's occurring in the Yorkdale, Dufferin area, we're going to lose opportunities to protect rights of way that will connect communities through cycling rights of way in the years to come. So that's why I want to put this forward and give it some attention now before we lose the opportunity. Because I'm already talking to some people that are looking at future developments in that area, and they're willing to put land aside for cycling lanes. But if we don't, work with them, we will lose these opportunities. So I'm trying to do this motion. I'm also trying to break down another east-west barrier. Right now, we have an incredible, thanks to Kay Gardner, we have the Kay Gardner belt line, which is used by cyclists, by walkers, joggers, but it ends at the Great Wall. There's a wall, the Allen Expressway wall, that divides the community, that makes it impossible for people to get from one side of the city to the other side. So I have another request later on whereby I want to break down that wall and get people to connect from the Kay Gardner Beltline to the York Beltline trail, which is an excellent cycling path, walking, jogging path that goes east to west. And many people who live on the east side of the wall have never been to the other side of the wall to walk or to even talk to people or to visit the great park that has now been extended to Marley Avenue because there's this wall there. So I'm also asking for a possible cycling connection, walking, jogging connection that finally gets rid of the divide. We have our own Berlin Wall. It seems right through the middle of the city. It's called the Allen Expressway. So I'm trying to break down that barrier there so we get people walking, cycling, going on strollers across that part of the city, which has been divided by that great big mistake called the Allen Expressway, which has destroyed communities for years and is still destroying it. So I think the key thing is for us to look ahead, breaking down barriers and going east and west. Rather than just, and I support going with cycling paths along our rail lines, and so that's fantastic. But we don't have enough east-west connectors, in the middle of the city. That's the underbelly of Toronto, everybody forgets about, underneath the 401, where people don't have enough opportunities to cycle, no opportunities to get across those walls, those barriers, which divide communities and make it easier to get into cars rather than getting onto their bicycles or walking or jogging. So that's why I put forth this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have a motion that I would like to move. That City Council requests the General Manager of Transportation Services to work with Bike Share Toronto to develop a coordinated plan to install bike share infrastructure across Toronto. Before I speak to that, I want to thank Mayor Tory for agreeing to the friendly amendment to his motion around open data. I will use the example of Ottawa, Ontario, where they have automated counters on their bike routes so they can see what the volume is. You can open their open data portal and see what the results of that are. With my regard, and before I also speak to my motion, I also like to let everybody know Google Maps made an announcement this morning. Google Maps now is tracking our bike stations in Toronto, our Bike Share Toronto stations. You can go to Google Maps live time this second, and see the availability of bicycles in each and every one of our bike stations in the City of Toronto. It was just announced this morning, which I think is very great news for our bicycling infrastructure in this city. With regards to my motion, one of the concerns that I have, it's the same that many of my residents have. It's kind of reaching out, as Councillor Cole just said, from east to west. If you look at the Bike Share Toronto program in Toronto, they don't have any stations east of Victoria Park and Kingston Road. There's not one Bike Share TO station. Last year I went to the Toronto Parking Authority and I asked for a pilot project in southeastern Toronto. I have buy-in from Metrolinx for all of the GO train stations, the large property owners, University of Toronto Scarborough, Centennial College. University of Toronto Scarborough in particular has a bicycle repair hub down on Old Kingston Road for their students. TCHC just announced a bike share hub at Lawrence and Norton Park. If you look at the report, the West Hill area, which was in the center of my ward, now it's in the eastern part of my ward, as listed as one of the growing areas for bicycling in the City of Toronto. The issue I have is that when I go to Bike Share Toronto and say, I want this pilot project, they say to me, you know, the City of Toronto doesn't have enough bicycling infrastructure. When I asked city staff about the bicycling infrastructure that needs to be put in, they said they're working on it. They had some discussions with Bike Share Toronto, but I think there needs to be a better connection there because just the request I had for Bike Share Toronto last year on social media, I had a lot of support for that. I tweeted it out. I've had residents that have said to me, why can't we have more bicycling infrastructure in my ward? You know, if you go to my ward now, the bicycling infrastructure amounts to some lock rings. There's one being put in at Morningside and Kingston Road this fall. I would like to see a lot more bicycling infrastructure in my ward. I think it's a matter of use it and they will come. My residents want it, and I'm looking forward to working with staff to see what can be done to increase the physical bicycling infrastructure being put in by the City of Toronto and also in conjunction with Bike Share Toronto. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis. And before we start, I'd just like to please ask members of council, staff, there's so much talking in here. Like, it's so noisy, it's hard to hear. Please, if you can please try to keep it down. Councillor Karygiannis to
Thank
speak.
you, Madam Speaker. I do have two motions. If staff can put them up, please, I'll speak to them. Basically, the motions speak to the need for insurance for bicyclists.
Yes.
And I would ask that the city transportation manager take a look at this and see if this is needed and find ways that we can achieve this. And if that fails, that the city set up a fund should people be injured and or property damage be done, that we look after this. Thank you, my colleagues, for allowing me to speak. Thank you very, very much.
Come on, please, Councillor Fletcher Ainsley, please.
Thank you. That was very polite of them both. Madam Speaker, we do have, thank you, we do have accidents that have happened with bicyclists and cars. We do have accidents that have happened between bicyclists and pedestrians. And what we need to make sure, while we're aggressively going after more bicyclists on the street, that we also address the issue of, should somebody get hurt, that they would be compensated. If a person gets hit and they're laid off for a couple of months, or they have a broken leg and they have a steel plate in their leg with a couple of screws, and that puts them off for a couple of months and probably affect them for the rest of their life, there should be some compensation that's given. There's compensation that we look after by cars. There's compensation if you got not an e-bike, but a motorcycle. Therefore, we should look at the possibility of having mandatory insurance, or somehow of insurance. This would be tied to your home insurance if you have a house, or if you've got an apartment and you got an insurance, or something that the city will certainly look at in order to provide. So when people are on the sidewalks, on the street, or crossing the street, and they get hurt by bicyclists, there's something that addresses that issue. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion. Thank you. It's a request that when matters come forward that require the removal of a live traffic lane, that the general manager reports to council first, so that we have the foresight that that element is involved in the project. And the reason for that is I appreciate that those type of cycling projects are the most controversial. I think most councillors generally support the installation of additional infrastructure, the adding of some painted bike lanes, even some bollards to separate the lanes. It's when we get into the discussions about closing down a lane that it becomes very controversial. I've been looking carefully at this report. It's quite complicated, it's long, and there's a number of maps in the report. And I want to make sure that members of council and the public understand what it is that we're voting for today. I've looked at the map number 1 in the first attachment, and it's really the set of desire lines across the city. It shows, using some data, where the staff think that the cyclists will go. And it should be no surprise, it very much mirrors busy streets where the cars are. And no surprise, part of the data was derived by taking short trips and making an assumption that some of those people would get out of their cars and use bikes. There's some other pieces in the report that, what I'll say about that map is, if somebody asks you, Councillor, what's your position on cycling in the city? I think that's a very convenient map to have. Now, I don't know if you'll agree with the matters that are shown on that map. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But you should pay very much attention to that, because that really is the vision that you're voting on. The second part is map 4, which is the execution of the strategy, where the lanes will go in the short term. I have some problems with what's being proposed there. There are some corridor studies and some focuses on things like Yonge Street, Bloor Street, Danforth, University. No surprise in some of the comments I've made in the past. I don't think that those are the right locations for cycling infrastructure. There's other places to be looked at. And the final one is attachment number 2, and that talks about where we're going to be looking at doing some studies in the future. The thing that really bothered me about it was I went into attachment number 7. It shows cycling volumes, and the lowest band is 300 to 300 people. What I've noticed is that some of the proposed areas for deeper corridor studies have less than 3 cyclists a day, and maybe they might have 300 to 300. You look carefully at this, you realize that even segments of University Avenue and Bloor Street, where we're rushing to go and study deeper, have these incredibly low volumes. You know, I realize there's an argument to be made that if you build it, they'll come. But I think the general public understands, maybe what we could intuitively glean is that there's not going to be this sudden wholesale change, and I think that's what frustrates them. You know, I listened to Councillor Cressley at the outset and said, we have a really congested city. I appreciate that. I walked along Bloor Street through many seasons before and after the bike lanes were put in. You know what I saw in the wintertime was not a lot of bike traffic. I saw a lot of backed up cars in the section where the lanes had been reduced. So I want to round this out and say, you know, I'm not a person that's opposed to bicycle infrastructure. In fact, I've pushed to get some of it installed in my own ward. And the attached report, I'm going to support the changes, except for Scarlet Road, because that's the closing of a lane. And if you look at the attachment number 7 again, back to the volumes, you realize that according to this map, there's less than 3 cyclists a day. And I appreciate that maybe that's actually more about filling in lanes and narrowing the road. But I'm not sure that everyone in the neighborhood is happy about that. So I guess the thing I wanted to leave with people was just be careful about what this vision says and make sure you understand about where it is that you're going to go. I'm not thoroughly convinced that all of the locations on these maps are the right places to put infrastructure. There may be some ways forward, and I look forward to working with staff on some of the projects that come out of this, but I can't support some of the visions that are contained in here because I don't think the people that I represent would support them either. Thank you.
Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have a motion.
Oh, just a sec. Sorry, Councillor Layton, there's one item that I had to do first. I apologize. Councillor Pasternak, you want to get up and you want to amend
Yes,
your
thank you.
motion?
On a point of order, the motion that I moved earlier in the debate is being slightly revised. I've asked the clerk to make those revisions and then recirculate.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Layton to speak.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a motion that City Council delete Infrastructure Environment Committee recommendations 17 and 19. 19's already covered in Councillor Matlow's motion, so I suspect that will be a duplication. And then 2, that City Council amend Infrastructure and Environment Committee recommendation 18, so it now reads, City Council direct the General Manager Transportation Services to develop a back-end review process for evaluating the success of new bike infrastructure that measures usage against defined metrics with a focus on road safety. I'll get to the motions in a second. First, I wanted to thank staff for their work on this item. It's been a difficult couple of years in the cycling unit with some turnover and a reallocation of spending to get some projects done. And so I think that there's a general understanding that that we needed to get a reset in the capital program so that we could get moving on some really key items that have been on the table for quite some time. Investing in a bike network is not only an investment in public health, an investment in climate mitigation, an investment in congestion management, but most importantly, it's an investment in road safety. We spent hours yesterday debating our Vision Zero plan. Hours. This is an extension of that Vision Zero plan. Cycling infrastructure saves lives. Poll after poll, public opinion research on top of public opinion research, and most importantly, our own experience tells us that when we build bike lanes, people choose to take bikes more. And we heard from Councillor Holliday, and I'm disappointed he's here because he doesn't get that in fact by building infrastructure people come. On Richmond Street, we went from 400 cyclists a day to over 4,000 cyclists a day. 400 to 4,000 because of that work. Now, I grew up on the back of a bike. Literally, it was a tandem bike. There's a statue of it now at the waterfront. I grew up on the back of a bike. And back in those days, there was zero public infrastructure. There was one bike lane, the Martin Goodman Trail. And even it was pretty terrible going down around Commissioner. There was one bike lane. There were very few cyclists. A lot of accidents. A lot of people getting hurt. But as the network got built out, as cycling became a more socialized activity in our communities, people chose that over their car, chose that over public transit because it's an easy and fun way to get around. we saw those lanes fill up. And it's not in every community yet. It took a long time even to get that level of cycling that we get downtown where it's most convenient. But it was building the infrastructure that helped us get there. We're not going to see that growth if every lane has to have a set of warrants that comes back after it's already been proposed as part of a cycling plan, and then come back a third time when there's discussion about the removal of some traffic, of a lane of traffic, and then come back a fourth time for us to all sign off on it after it's built. We're not going to see growth, and all we're going to see is these staff people coming back over and over and over again with reports about the same thing. We have a bike plan that has determined here's a network we want to build out. We know what the numbers are showing. We know that infrastructure will bring more cyclists to the network, but most importantly, it's about creating that network. And if we all of a sudden just start pulling pieces out because we don't like that it takes a lane of traffic, or we don't like that it doesn't yet have enough cyclists, then we're not going to end up with the right network out there. I will point out a couple things. I'm going to be supporting Mayor Tory's motion. I'll also be calling them the Tory Tally Towers from now on. I won't be supporting, I would urge you all not to support Councillor Karygiannis's motion about requiring insurance. We've been down that road. Home insurance and renter's insurance already covers cyclists, so I won't be going down and supporting that. And I certainly hope that you won't support Councillor Holliday's motion, as I don't know how many times we want to see these same reports come back on the same projects, but I hope we can avoid that going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion that City Council direct the Director, Energy and Environment to model carbon dioxide emission reduction equivalents achieved through the city's cycling network plan and report back to Infrastructure and Environment Committee as part of Transform TO reporting. The city has an ambitious target that by 2050, 75% of trips under 5 kilometers are walked or cycled. The city also has an ambitious target of 80% CO2 reductions from 1990 levels by 2050. And while we're doing great on both our cycling network plan and we're doing great work with Transform TO, we could do a better job aligning these two strategies so that they're informing each other. In particular, Mayor Tory has moved a motion that's looking at introducing automatic bike count technology. So this gives us data that we can use to calculate CO2 emissions, and we can look at what we're actually achieving through the cycling network as it informs TO. This helps us to further break down our target of 75% that we want for trips under 5 kilometers cycled or walked. Right now, we don't have that broken out into where we want to be in 10 years, where we want to be in 20 years, and then getting us up to that 2050. So if we're collecting this data in real time, it can help us to inform next steps for both Cycle TO and Transform TO.
Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I actually have a motion that I was preparing, and I don't think it's ready. I have one. They have one, but there's a second one that's on the way. So if we can stand my speaking time down, I'll be able to come back to it.
Okay, we'll have to deal with it after later on in the day. Councillor Fletcher, we have time for one more speaker. Councillor Fletcher? No? Councillor Fillion?
Thank you. Briefly, what we have before us is a long-term plan. There are some members of council who would want to limit it in a way that makes it a very a plan for the present. And obviously the essence of good planning is to look where you need to go and what you need to do to get there. So when we talk about a cycling network, especially outside of the downtown, we're looking at something that will have incremental change. It will take in, in places like Willowdale, it will take quite a while till you change the patterns and get large numbers of people cycling. And in order, you certainly have the conditions that would would cause that to happen if you put a cycling network in place. You have to start with bits and pieces as you're reconstructing roads, and eventually you end up with a network. Eventually, people who are deciding where they want to live, if they're cyclists and they want to take public transit and cycle and walk, will gravitate towards those areas. So the whole notion of trying to do it with some kind of a warrant system that looks only at the present is completely self-defeating. We are looking into the future, and we can anticipate success in the future. We cannot measure the future success in the present, but we know that if we do this properly, we will create the conditions which will create the kind of city that we need. Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, we're recessed at 2 o'clock.